All right, well, welcome to class again. We're going to cover some more of what's on our seminar part 4B, lies in the textbooks, only now we're up to the point of what do we do about it? Okay, it's obvious there are lots of things in the textbooks that just simply are not true. What do we do about it? Some practical steps to how to fix the problem. The Bible says in Matthew chapter 5, our job is to be the salt of the earth. You know, salt is amazing. Salt irritates. If nobody's irritated at you, you're probably not a very good Christian. Salt flavors. Our job is to bring out the best. You know, you put salt on to bring out the flavor in things, and we should bring out the best in people and in our neighborhoods and in our churches and in our schools. We should truly be the salt of the earth. Salt also preserves from corruption. And if there's corruption in your school or corruption in your textbook, our job is to help preserve the community from that. We should do something about it. So our job is to be the salt of the earth. Now, I would have to say, in my experience, I would say most of the teachers that I know, and I know many public school teachers. My brother, 34 years, he led me to the Lord. He's been teaching public school for 34 years. My mother retired from teaching public school. Most of the teachers that I know are sincere, dedicated professionals. They are not the enemy, okay? They are often put in a position where they have to work with curriculum that is just corrupt, because the decision of what they get to teach from is made years before. And we'll get into more of that in a minute. So many of them teach evolution because that's all they've ever been taught. They simply don't know any better. And a lot of them don't realize they can teach creation science if they want. They've been taught you cannot teach creation science, but that simply is not true. Let me give you a little bit of the history behind this. First of all, it is perfectly fine for a teacher to teach creation science in a public school if they want to. Back in the 1800s, the average textbook taught about creation. Oh, got brand new chalk here. Good. If you got a textbook from the 1800s, you would see that they taught creation. They taught the earth is 6,000 years old, roughly, or was created in 4000 BC, and it was done in 6 days. They taught the Bible story. Then from 1800, actually 1836, I believe, is when the first public schools really got going, sometime in the early 1800s, and I think they started in Massachusetts, if I recall. But, and they taught the Bible as their curriculum. Up until about 1925, when a very famous trial took place, which we're going to talk about here in a few minutes, the Scopes monkey trial, as it has come to be known as, and I've got the whole court case right here in front of us. Up until this time, creation was taught right from the Bible. Teacher would get up in class, they would read the Bible story, they would discuss it, and kids would be tested on it. What happened? In 1925, several states passed laws outlawing or banning evolution. One was called the Butler Act. The Butler Act passed, I think it passed in 1925. The Butler Act became law in Tennessee. This was the law that was challenged by the ACLU. Actually, the ACLU advertised in papers in Tennessee. They said, we are looking for a teacher who's willing to challenge the Butler Act. Because the Butler Act said you cannot teach evolution. Okay, so this is important to know. This will be on the quiz. All the Butler Act did is outlaw the teaching of evolution. Now keep in mind, there has never been a law banning creation. There were laws banning evolution. No state has ever passed a law saying you can't teach creation. So in 1925, the state of Tennessee passed the Butler Act, which said you cannot teach evolution, period. The ACLU advertised, and they said, we're looking for a teacher who's willing to challenge the Butler Act. They found a teacher named John T. Scopes. Put him on the quiz because he is a famous fellow here. John T. Scopes was approached at the drugstore in Dayton, Tennessee, which is north of Chattanooga. And by the way, there's a famous courthouse there where this trial took place, and you can still go take tours of the courthouse. I've been through it, been through Dayton many times. John Scopes was sitting around at the drugstore, and these guys came and said, would you be willing to testify that you taught evolution? And he said, well, I don't teach science, but I did substitute one day while the science teacher was gone, but I don't know if I really taught evolution or not. And they said, well, would you be willing to claim that you did? Perjury, in other words. You know, would you lie on the witness stand? Or on the witness stand? He said, well, yeah, I'd be willing to testify that I taught evolution. So they had him indicted, or whatever the word is, for teaching evolution, even though he wasn't sure he'd ever done it. And the ACLU did all this just as a test case to try to get this Butler Act overturned. What they were hoping to do is get media attention. So the news media would come in, and boy, they did get a lot of that. And they wanted to make creationists look stupid and evolution look great. And they wanted to use this as a chance to really push their religion of evolution. Well, as it turned out, some very famous lawyers got involved here. Clarence Darrow was the lawyer for the ACLU. He said, and he was a very famous lawyer and a skeptic, claimed to be an atheist and outspoken atheist of that day. He said, I will come in for the ACLU and I will defend this poor teacher who is now being accused of teaching evolution. Actually, they set up the whole thing, okay? They did it on purpose. William Jennings Bryan said he had 3 or 4 times been vice presidential candidate. I mean, he'd run for vice president of the United States. He was a very famous person of the day in the mid-1920s, okay? He was in government in several different positions. I forget what his position was at the time, but William Jennings Bryan was an outspoken advocate of creation. And he preached sermons all over the place against evolution. So William Jennings Bryan came down to Dayton, Tennessee, and he says, well, I'll take him on. I'll defend the law, the Butler Act. And so it was quite the trial. It was very hot. The courtroom, they were worried the courtroom was going to collapse because so many people were crammed in there. So they moved everything outside. Plus, it was extremely hot down there in July, north of, well, you went to school in Chattanooga, you know, in summer it gets pretty warm. And here they were 90 miles north in the town of Dayton. The entire court transcript is available in a book called The World's Most Famous Court Trial. Fascinating reading. As you read the book, you'll see that an awful lot of the typical lawyer type stuff, you know, bantering back and forth, selecting witnesses and all this. You have to realize the ACLU was hoping they would find him guilty. They were hoping their client would lose, and then they would appeal it to a higher court, so it would get nationwide attention. And as the trial went back and forth, Bryant, though he was a great and godly man, I've got lots of stuff on William Jennings Bryant right here. Here's a book about William Jennings Bryan. If you want to read more, you can come get this. There's lots of good stuff. He was a great and godly man, but he made several serious mistakes. He said on the witness stand, I'm not sure that the earth is 6,000 years old, and I'm not sure that the days are real days. So here in 1925, he was a product of his times. He kind of believed in either the gap theory or the day-age theory. When he said that on the witness stand, most of the Christians were very disappointed in him right then. And it tells about it in the book. You know, they said, oh, you blew it right there. And boy, the Christians of the early 1800s and all through the 1800s and early 1900s, they did blow it for Christianity by not standing up for the obvious truth. The Bible teaches God made the world in 6 days, and it adds up to about 6,000 years ago. Just, there is no compromise. That's what it says, and that's what all the scientific evidence points toward. So when William Jennings Bryan and Clarence Darrow faced off an incredible trial, it turned out Scopes was found guilty. Now during the trial, Clarence Darrow had lined up all kinds of witnesses to bring in. The witnesses were going to testify that evolution is a fact. One of the things they were going to use was the Piltdown Man. They were also going to have the president of the American, or the curator of the American Museum of Natural History come in. He's the one who said black people are inferior. He said the average adult Negro has the intelligence of an 11-year-old white man, white boy. Or of course racism was, you know, 1925. There was a lot more racism in our country. The judge disallowed any evidence for evolution. See, they were hoping to use this trial to get all this evidence for evolution out there for everybody to look at. The judge said, I'm sorry, the question is not, is there evidence for evolution? The question is, did he teach it? Because the law says you can't teach it. So I don't care if there's evidence for it or not, it doesn't matter. That's not what we're here for. So the purpose of the trial was for the evolutionists was to try to get notoriety and media attention for their religion, for evolution. And the judge wisely said, I'm sorry, it doesn't matter if there's any evidence. we'll throw it out. We're not even going to hear it. So they banter back and forth, and you can read the whole court transcript there. Finally, Scopes was found guilty of teaching evolution. Now, Darrow really was shrewd and slick and wicked. Darrow agreed that Brian could put him on the witness stand if he could put Brian on the witness stand. Well, that's extremely unusual for the lawyers to go on the witness stand, you know. Normally they're out there, you know, trying to get the witness to say some things. So sure enough, Brian was put on the witness stand, and Darrow asked him all kinds of questions that he had all prepared. And then, rather than Darrow go on the witness stand and have to give evidence for evolution, he just said, Your Honor, we surrender, basically. I want you to find my client guilty. So Brian had this tremendous speech all prepared, and he was really going to blast Darrow, and would have done it, but it just took all the wind out of their sails. They just couldn't do it. Brian was a huge man, overweight, you know, overweight and overate, and finally a few days after the trial he died of heart failure, apparently related to being overweight. So the college that started there in his honor is called Bryan College in Dayton, Tennessee. Have about 400 or 500 students, maybe 600 or 700 now, I don't know. Good college, some very good teachers there, and they are a creationist college. Within the first, I don't know, 40 or 50 years after this trial, the teacher was found guilty. He was fined $100. Brian offered to pay it. The fine was appealed and overturned. The next level of court said, no, I'm sorry, you made a mistake in the trial, some little technicality, the fine's overturned. So nothing ever happened. Evolution was still illegal. The Butler Act was not overturned. It was still against the law in many states to teach evolution. After the trial, a movie was made, a play was written, and then a movie was made called Inherit the Wind. Now write that down. You're going to need to know that one. Okay? Inherit the Wind is absolutely a perversion of the trial. Okay? Inherit the Wind. And it has been redone several times as plays or as things like that, movies for kids for school. There's a friend of mine named George Searle who has done extensive studies of the actual court trial, which you can get word for word transcript of the whole thing. I've got it right here. Compared it to the movie. The whole purpose of that movie is to make Christians look stupid and to make the evolutionists look brilliant. Okay? Typical Hollywood stuff. And if you want to get, I've got tons and tons of material on Inherit the Wind on the movie. If that movie is showing in your public school, you ought to protest against that, because that is an absolute perversion of what really happened. During this trial, though, in 1925, Darrow brought up the fact, hey, evolution is in our textbook. Tennessee has already approved a textbook which contains evolution. And now you're saying you're banning the teaching of evolution. He was right. I have the textbooks they were fighting over. 1911, by Hunter, New Essentials of Biology, by George W. Hunter. This is the book, 1911, that was used in Tennessee schools. Now, it doesn't have a lot of evolution in it, but it does have some. It does teach evolution. So here Tennessee made a mistake 15 years earlier by allowing textbooks in that teach evolution. Here's what typically happens in a state, and this is the sequence that a lot of Christians and creationists don't seem to comprehend. Okay? First, the state will set standards. And this is where we've got to get involved. The state will set standards that one of the standards will be, we want evolution taught. You get a committee of, 5 or 10 or 15 or 20 people, they set the state standards. Now, all of the textbook publishers publish books to try to sell to that state. The ones that are the most strict on this, and the ones that most people really look to, are the standards from Texas. I don't know why, but Texas is a real place, a testing ground for textbooks. So Mel Gabler in Longview, Texas, has done a great job for 39 or 40 years now. He and his ministry, all they do is review textbooks and write critiques on them. And they rate them according to which one's the best. Texas standards are very high for textbooks. For instance, Texas standards require that if a theory is taught, the evidence for it and against it should be presented. The Gablers were influential in getting that in there as a Texas standard. You must teach evidence against evolution. Now, Texas doesn't do it. They don't obey the law, but they're supposed to. Okay? A publisher, let's say there are 10 different publishers, just for sake of the argument, okay? The publishers will look at the different standards and they'll say, okay, by the time the kid graduates, he's supposed to know this and this and this and this and this. Let's make sure it is in our textbooks because we want to sell our books to this state. The publishers want one thing: money. Okay? They want to sell you their books. So they may print, 4 million textbooks. If Texas rejects them because they have mistakes, one of the things the Gablers do is just simply find out-and-out mistakes in the textbooks. One of them had, Columbus discovering America in 1750, or something like that. Just unbelievable mistakes, just crazy things in there. George Washington is Abe Lincoln's vice president or something like that. Just flat stuff that's wrong. Okay? Thousands of things are found that are just plain wrong in the textbooks. But Texas will reject them. So here this publisher, HBJ, Harcourt Brace Jovanovich, or Prentice Hall, or whoever, they got this warehouse full of textbooks. Well, they sell them to some other state. They make a new run with the corrections for Texas, but the old ones, the ones that didn't pass, they'll sell to other states that aren't looking, aren't watching. And this is what happens, because they don't want to get stuck with, $20 million or $50 million worth of textbooks. So they'll sell them somewhere else. The state standards are set. Then the publishers publish books to meet the state standards. Then you have some competition. Then you have a state committee Now, 22 states have a state textbook selection committee. There are 50 states, okay? 22 of them have a state textbook selection. Florida is one of them. There's a committee that meets in Tallahassee. The committee looks at the state standards, and they say, okay, the book must contain these things. They look over the available textbooks, and let's say there are 10 publishers. Those publishers will send a sample copy to the state committee. The state committee looks over the sample copies, and they will narrow it down and say, we approve, these 3 or these 5. Typically it's 5. It's not a hard, fast rule. They approve 5 books that meet the state standards. They send a list of those 5 to every county or district. For instance, in Escambia County, there is a county school board. So at this point, the county or the district school board, they will select 1 or 2 books, okay? And then they will notify all the teachers in the county, you may pick a book, pick this one or this one. Let me see your book there for a second, okay? This one had to go through this process. It was state approved, and then the county approved it. Then they purchased X number of thousand of them for our county, for the biology students in Escambia County. This is at Woodham High School, okay? The basic idea is the teacher could order any textbook they wanted. They could order a Christian textbook. Your public school could order Christian textbooks, but the state won't pay for it. If you pick a book off the list we approve, then the state will pay for it. Now, a book like this probably costs $50 or $60, for one book. Times how many kids in your class, or how many kids use this book at your school, would you guess? About 25 in your class, and how many biology classes are there? 5 or 6? Yeah. A lot of money at $60 a book. And it's just one school. And there are, what, 4 high schools in Pensacola? 5 now? Yeah, that's right. Tate and, yeah. So the county then will select the book. Here's what happens then. After the book is in the classroom, the kid brings it home, the parents complain. And they should, okay? But we're about 5 steps too late. What Kansas did in 98, I believe, the Kansas school board, Kansas has a state school board, okay, in addition to a state committee that selects books. The Kansas school board said, our state standards will not require macroevolution to be taught. That was it. They did not say you can't teach evolution. They just said we're not going to require that macroevolution be part of the state standards. The teacher can still teach it if they want, but it's no longer required, which means it's no longer required to be on the tests. Boy, the atheists hit the ceiling. You'd have thought, you know, somebody shot them. They said, oh, they took evolution out of the textbooks. First, no, they didn't, okay? But if somebody believes in evolution and there is no God, they don't have any moral they don't have to have any moral standards anyway. So, you know, it's okay to lie and cheat and steal, because after all, there is no God if we evolve. And if evolution is true, the toughest and meanest survive, you know, the strongest survive. The fastest lion gets the zebra. And so, you know, it's okay. As a matter of fact, it's good to get your cause accomplished any way you want. This is the typical scenario, though, that things happen. So, for most of American history, teaching creation was perfectly fine, and it was done in the textbooks. Laws banning evolution were introduced in 1925. Those laws were not overturned until 1968. It was against the law to teach evolution in public school in many states in America until 1968, when the last law was overturned. Now, the fact is, the books taught it anyway. They were still teaching evolution, even though it was against the law, but nobody wanted to challenge it for fear of a repeat of what's called the Scopes monkey trial. Now, how it got the name Scopes monkey trial, I don't know, but it's the trial in Dayton, Tennessee. So, it was against the law to teach evolution. There has never been a law banning creation. Never has been. Then in 1980, Arkansas passed a law demanding equal time. The state senate in Arkansas, or state representatives and senators in Arkansas got together and said, look, if you're going to teach evolution, you must also teach creation and give it equal time. This was called the balanced treatment idea. If we're going to teach one theory, let's teach the other theory. That's what the citizens in Arkansas wanted. That's what the Congress and Senate wanted. That's what the governor wanted. Somebody challenged that law and said this law requiring balanced treatment is a violation of the First Amendment because it lets it mandates a state-sponsored religion because creation is a religious idea. Well, I think they're right. Creation is a religious idea, and now you have the state sponsoring a religion. The only problem with the law was they were requiring creation to be taught. The teachers already had the right to teach it. They could have taught it if they wanted. But when the Senate comes in, or Congress comes in and says, you must teach it, they cross the line, and that's what the judge said. Now, in 1987, Louisiana did the same thing. Louisiana law was written much better, and I think probably was, I don't know of any serious flaws in it. I read the whole thing. But Louisiana in 1987 tried the same thing. They said you must have balanced treatment. Now see, what they're doing, in my opinion, in both states, they worked on the wrong end of the problem. I don't think that's the way to handle this at all. Just my humble, unbiased opinion. And since this is my class, we'll just teach whatever we want, right? Choice number one, evolution only. Choice number two, creation only. Choice number three, teach both. That's what Louisiana and Arkansas tried. The court struck it down in both cases. The Louisiana law went all the way to the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court struck it down, said, no, you cannot require the teachers to teach creation. Choice number four, teach neither. This has been tried and tried and tried, and Christians and creationists still get excited about doing this. It's not going to work. I'm sorry, it's not going to work. And so give it up. An awful lot of money and time and energy has been wasted. So when somebody in a local school area tries to come in to demand equal time, the atheists and evolutionists they're not too scared about that. They know it's not going to go anywhere. So they like keeping these Christians busy, wasting or trying to get equal time. Go ahead and write your letters, get your petitions, you know, get the parents fired up. Doesn't matter. You're wasting time. What if instead all of our effort was put into one thing? Get accurate textbooks. Require the books to be accurate. Take out the lies out of the textbooks. Now, everything that supposedly supports evolution is going to vanish. I mean, if you took out the 27 or 28 lies we've mentioned in this class that support evolution, or get the book Icons of Evolution and just simply remove the lies. Period. Now the evolution teacher's in a very unfortunate position because they get up there and say, okay, kids, I believe we all came from a rock. However, I don't have any evidence. Starts to look pretty silly. But the way they're doing it now is they're saying, kids, I believe we came from a rock, and here's the evidence. Bang, bang, bang. And one by those things have all been proven wrong, but they're still in there. It all is based on the idea the Earth is billions of years old, and it's not. And if you can prove that wrong, that destroys evolution. So I think step by step we need to challenge the statements in the textbooks that are not accurate. Simple. Arkansas is working on a law right now. A couple of representatives called me last week, and they want me to read the law before they present it. That's going to require that the state will not fund, the state will not pay for any books that contain false information. Great. Who can argue against that? And if they'll follow through on it, that's the thing, okay? So there are many good impact articles that deal with this subject of the laws in the 1980 and 1987 Louisiana law that required balanced treatment. So we need to have a quiz question. What were they asking for in Arkansas and Louisiana? They were asking for balanced treatment, and the court struck it down. They said you cannot do that. Basically, the whole purpose, the whole point of all this was you're not allowed to require this. And how people didn't catch on, I don't know. Even guys like Stephen Jay Gould, who's the Marxist professor at Harvard University. Stephen Gould said after the Louisiana trial, no statute exists in any state to bar instruction in creation science. It could be taught before, and it can be taught now. Michael Zimmerman said, the Supreme Court ruling did not in any way outlaw the teaching of creation science in public school classrooms. Quite simply, it ruled that in the form taken by the Louisiana law, it is unconstitutional to demand equal time for this particular subjects. Creation science can still be brought into classrooms if and when the teachers and administrators feel it is appropriate. Numerous surveys have shown that teachers and administrators favor just this route. And in fact, creation science is being taught in science courses throughout the country. The Supreme Court's decision says that only that the Louisiana law violates the Constitution of constitutional separation of church and state. It does not say no one can teach scientific creationism, and unfortunately many individual teachers do. Some schools, districts even require equal time for creation and evolution. This is what Eugenia Scott said after the decision. I debated Eugenia Scott on the radio when I was in Boston one time. She was in California. Her entire organization, the National Center for Science Education, their whole organization exists to keep creation out of schools. Funded by one of the guys in the late 1800s, not Rockefeller, but one of the other rich guys, started this organization with a grant to keep evolution in the textbooks and creation out. So they've got their own website, NSCS, I think. Oh, there it is on the screen there. National Center for Science Education.org, NAT, whatever abbreviation, you can look it up there on the internet. And they will instruct people, they say, don't debate creationists because you probably lose. They'll say creationists are professional debaters. They're trained in how to do this. I've never had a course on debate in my life, and I think the creationists win because they're right and the evolutionists are wrong. I mean, that's why we win. It's not nothing complicated about it. William Provine said, teachers and school boards in public schools are already free under the Constitution of the USA to teach about supernatural origins if they wished in their science classes. Laws can be passed in most countries of the world requiring discussions of supernatural origins in science classes and still satisfy national legal requirements. And I have a suggestion for evolutionists. Include discussions of supernatural origins in your classes and promote discussion of them in public and other schools. Come off your high horse about having only evolution taught in science class. The exclusionism you promote is painfully self-serving and smacks of elitism. Why are you afraid of confronting the supernatural creationism believed by the majority of persons in the USA and perhaps the worldwide? Good question. Now this guy believes in evolution, okay, and he teaches it to his students. But he says, look, we ought to teach both. Perfectly fine. Provine went on to say, shouldn't students be encouraged to express their beliefs about origins in a class discussing origins by evolution? Sure. One lady wrote me, a public school teacher said, or one fellow wrote me and said, Mr. Hovind, I'm a public school science teacher. I went to a conference today and we were all given a new science textbook to use in the conference. It is called The Sciences by whatever that publisher is, John Wiley and Sons. On page 611, it said this: to what extent do you think that parents should have the right to decide which scientific theories and ideas are presented in schools? To what extent do you think parents ought to have the right to demand that opposing religious views be taught as well? Should the views of creationism, which are primarily based on one particular type of Christianity, be given special consideration? It's getting more difficult to teach the truth, to say the truth all the time. You know what this is doing? This is trying to let the science teachers, this is brainwashing is what it is for the science teachers. They're teaching the teachers, well, you know, creationism is only based on the Bible. Well, first place, is that true? No. No. The idea that there's a creator is based on the obvious. I mean, look around, okay? There was a creator. You don't need to be a rocket scientist to figure it out. I often get emails from atheists. I'll get, oh, I don't know, 10 or 15 a day probably that I have to respond back to. And they'll say something like, you know, creation, evolution is a proven fact, and, you know, how can you believe there's a God type emails. They get those all the time. And one of my responses is, do you need to light a candle to see the sun? I mean, look around. There's evidence for design everywhere you look. Every little molecule is designed. Every atom is designed. The proteins are designed. Every cell in your body is designed. You got 50 trillion cells in your body. Each one is more complicated than New York City. You think this happened by chance? Well, if you want to believe that, that's fine, but don't call that science. That's a religious worldview. ICR has a great impact article number 196. They're like 10 cents a piece, okay, if you want to get back issues. You could call them and order 1,000 and pass out to your community or pass out in your school, you know. Let the teachers know, look, you can teach creation science. I think we have a problem because so many teachers have been brainwashed into thinking they can't, when actually it's perfectly fine to teach creation science. All right, let's take a little break here. When we come back, we'll cover more on what to do about what's going on in our schools and textbooks. Okay, let's continue now. Some things you can do to fix the problem in your local area, your school. Okay, you can start a Bible class right in your public school. Elizabeth Ridenour will help you do that. Her phone number and address is right here. She has helped get Bible classes started in public schools all across America. There are now over 150,000 students studying the Bible in public school from her curriculum. I met with her several months ago when I was preaching in North Carolina, and she's a great lady and will help you get a Bible class started if you'd like to do that. You might want to get the book by Dwayne Gish. We sell it to our ministry for $5, Teaching Creation Science in a Public School. Now, he very carefully distinguishes between creation science and biblical creationism. Teaching creation science says, look, the scientific evidence says there must have been a creator. Teaching biblical creationism says God made the world 6,000 years ago. The first man was Adam. His wife's name was Eve. You know, that kind of stuff probably is not, should not be taught in a school. Certainly, that's a tough question to answer, but there's a difference between teaching biblical creationism and teaching scientific creationism. The fact is, the evidence is overwhelming. There must have been a designer. Mel Gabler said, states can legally require teachers to discuss evolution. They cannot require them to discuss creation. Teachers may discuss creation if they wish, but the states cannot require them. The Gablers are great friends in this battle against the evolution theory. You can contact them. Their website is TXBK for textbook reviews, REVWS, at AOL.com. So you can get a hold of, that's their email, get a hold of the Gablers or their phone number here on the screen in Longview, Texas. The courts allow states to require discussing scientific weaknesses in evolution, but not require discussing creation. So a state could pass a law that requires the weaknesses of a theory to be taught. Texas did that, but they're not enforcing it. What would have to happen is somebody would have to get on the county textbook selection committee, somebody like a bulldog that says, look, I'm hanging on, I'm not letting go, and you just simply say these books do not match the state standards. The state standards require weaknesses. The book doesn't present weaknesses. If they buy the book anyway, then they ought to be sued for breaking the law. The problem in this battle, as I see it, is most Christians are too nice to sue people. We'd let them poison our kids rather than stop them, you know. And it's time we do something about it, in my humble opinion. Back in 1963, a Supreme Court I think this was the case where they're taking prayer out of the schools with William Murray, Madeline Murray O'Hare. If not, it was one of the cases shortly thereafter. But the court held in 1963, it certainly may be said the Bible is worthy of study for its literary and historic qualities. Nothing we have said here indicates that such study of the Bible or of religion, when presented objectively as part of a secular program of education, may be effected consistently with the First Amendment. In 1980, the Eighth Circuit Court ruled, I'm sorry, this was the U.S. Supreme Court, okay? Supreme Court said, the Bible may constitutionally be used in an appropriate study of history, civilization, ethics, comparative religion, or the like. So, in 1980, the Eighth Circuit Court said, the school can use the Bible because it will enhance the students' knowledge and appreciation of the role of that religious heritage played in the social, cultural, and historical development of civilization. But if you go check your textbooks now, any mention of Christianity has been stripped out. You might find 2 pages on Marilyn Monroe and 2 sentences on George Washington. It is unbelievable what's happened in the textbooks. They're being rewritten to play down Christianity and to emphasize all sorts of things that they have as part of their plan toward a new world order. In 1987, Supreme Court ruled, teachers already possess the flexibility to present a variety of scientific theories about origins of humankind. They are free to teach any and all facets of the subject. Teaching a variety of scientific theories about the origins of mankind to school children might be done with the clear secular intent of enhancing the effectiveness of science instruction. This is the case that Stephen Gould commented on and said, look, the courts have never banned creation. There were laws banning evolution, but they've never banned creation. California State School Board, their policy is, discussions of any scientific fact, hypothesis, or theory related to the origins of the universe, the earth, and of life, that's the how, are appropriate to the science curriculum. So I would encourage Christians to realize, look, it's perfectly fine. Now there are several ways to fight this battle. The way Jesus did it, Jesus did not spend much time trying to change the Roman Empire. Most of his effort was reaching individuals. The simplest and I think the foolproof way, number 1, is go after souls, win souls, and teach them the truth. Just like Jesus said, go into all the world, preach the gospel. After you get them saved, teach them, or baptize them, and then teach them to do everything I told you to do. That's unstoppable. We probably will never change the textbooks in our county, though I think we should try. But if we got every kid in your class converted to believing in creation, or to being a Christian, or both, it doesn't matter what they're teaching. They're not going to believe it. Right? Second level, and I think this needs to be a multi-pronged attack, but the second level is go after the teachers. Many teachers are already Christians. They just simply don't know what their rights are. So if we inform the teachers of what their rights are, or inform them of the truth of creation, see, curriculum really starts when the classroom door shuts. Very few teachers ever make it all the way through the textbook in the year anyway. Do you guys skip chapters in yours? Sure. And with some textbooks, it's easier to skip the whole chapter because they put all the evolution stuff in one chapter. Other textbook authors spread it through everything. Merrill Science, several times, has put all the evolution stuff in 1 or 2 chapters, and the teacher can just say, okay, we're going to skip this. And it doesn't play into most of the rest of the textbook. Level 3 is go after the whole school. Get the principal or the school board in the area or something to say, look, let's get this out of the textbooks, let's fix this problem. I think we need to work on this, but most of my effort, and I think most of Jesus' effort, was on the individuals. That way, it doesn't matter what the rest of them are doing. So there's a great video on what's happening in public school classrooms, not only on evolution, but on sex education and all sorts of other things, available from Eagle Forum. That's Phyllis Schlafly's organization in Alton, Illinois. Now, Phyllis Schlafly is a Catholic. I would disagree with her on several major doctrines, but she's done it. She's a constitutional lawyer, and she's done a great job of defending the Christians' rights in schools. Okay. Some people say, what about separation of church and state? There is no such phrase used in the Constitution. That sentence, separation of church and state, was written in a letter by Thomas Jefferson to a Baptist pastor in 1802. It is not part of the Constitution. The wall of separation between church and state is to keep the state from getting involved in the church's business. Peter Kershaw has a great book, which we sell both of his books through our ministry. One is called Hush Money. The other is called In Caesar's Grip. Hush Money is the shortened version. In Caesar's Grip is the long version. They are awesome books about how churches have really blown it by becoming 501c3 corporations. That's one of the dumbest things a church could do, because now you're asking the government for permission to exist. And God already told you what to do. It's a matter of, who is sovereign anyway? And they have taken church and put it under the government. Major, major mistake. And we'll get into more of that later. Impact article number 278, available from Institute for Creation Research, icr.org, is about a fellow in North Carolina. I talked to Steve Deckard. He teaches at it's not a Baptist school, it's a Christian school of, I think, Plymouth Brethren or some other denomination up in North Dakota, not North Carolina, North Dakota or South Dakota, I forget. Anyway, he rated all the textbooks based on how much evolution do they have in them. His rating of the 1991 textbooks said biology by Merrill and everyday experience had only 2.9% of the words in the textbook were talking about evolution. The rest is just talking about biology like it's supposed to, okay? HBJ, the yellow version, had 15.6%. It was the worst. And here's the rating here of the textbooks. Now, that's not going to be the same every year. This doesn't mean that Merrill is always the best. Okay, it varies greatly from year to year. I encourage people to get science teachers to get the book of Pandas and People. We sell it to our ministry, or you can get it off the internet. But that book is a supplemental biology textbook written from the perspective of there must have been an intelligent designer, called the design perspective. Now, one of the authors of this book is Dean Kenyon, K-E-N-Y-O-Y, Kenyon, A-N-A-N, I think. Dean Kenyon teaches in San Francisco, and he was an evolutionist. He wrote books about evolution, and he got converted. He had already taught for 20 years. It was either Stanford or San Francisco State, I forget where he taught, but someplace in the Bay Area. They fired him for teaching his students that evolution was questionable. He sued them because, hey, he said, I've been teaching here 20 years. I'm tenured. You can't just fire me. And they had a big deal over that, big lawsuit on all that. And finally, he was reinstated as a lab assistant. Well, normally, college juniors and seniors get the job of lab assistant, clean up the test tubes when everybody's done. My understanding is, finally, after a great legal battle, they put him back in a classroom, but they've tried everything they can to keep students out from under his influence, because they think his evil influence is going to encourage them to not believe in evolution. So that's one example. We've got lots more we'll get into when we get into the question-answer session. I've added several pages of people who have been discriminated against because of their religious belief. And we've encouraged you might want to get the book Icons of Evolution if you want more. This guy rates the textbooks. He gives them an A, B, C, D, or F based upon how they handle the 15 different icons of evolution, like the gill slits. They gave them all an F, I think, because they all mention it. It's been proven wrong 126 years ago. Okay, the horse evolution. How do they handle this? First, he goes through all the law, all the evidence, and says, "Look, it's been proven wrong. It's been proven wrong. It's been proven wrong. How does this textbook handle it?" So he rated quite a few textbooks based upon how they handle these different lies that have been proven wrong. I mean, everybody knows they're wrong, but why do they still present it? I think most of them got F in every category. A couple of them got a D in a few categories. So the choice this year for your textbooks is strychnine or arsenic. Which do you prefer? Here's the Gabler's book that we also sell through our ministry. What are they teaching our children? A great book. It's only $4. You can get that and give it out to people for people involved in education, or give the Gablers a call. They will be glad to help you in textbook selection. If you get on the textbook selection committee in your area, you're going to be overwhelmed because all these publishers send you these books, please buy our book. You don't have time to read them all. Gablers have already done it. Get on that committee and say, write to the Gablers and say, look, now they work on a donation basis, okay? Write to the Gablers and say, here's $200 or here's $300 or whatever. Please send us your evaluation of these books. Because it's going to cost them, you know, to print the pages and to send them to you and all that kind of stuff, plus their staff they have there. So I would encourage you to do that. It's crsc.org has a rating of textbooks also. The Gablers wrote me this letter in the 2000, and they said, Dear Dr. Hovind, thank you for using What Are They Teaching Our Children? You will be interested to know that in our 39 years of work, we have never seen publishers so sensitive or schools so receptive to our textbook reviews and ranking. See, what the Gablers do is they review all the textbooks and rank them. This one's the best, this one's the worst. They don't recommend anybody buy one or not buy one. They just rank them according to best to worst in their opinion, and they send that ranking sheet all over Texas to school boards. School boards look at this ranking sheet sort of like Consumer Reports, you know. They're the Consumer Reports of textbooks. For instance, one thing they do is they rank them on just how many inaccuracies do they have. How many things are in here that are just flat wrong, okay? And every textbook has mistakes, I'm sure, but some have lots and lots of mistakes. And so they rank them, and then, of course, this greatly affects sales. So the publishers now are getting hold of the Gablers saying, okay, we're sorry, what would you like in the books anyway? You know, it took them 39 years to get where they are, but I would encourage you to take advantage of what they do because they are a great asset to the Christian. He went on to say, we're also pleased to recommend the Harcourt and Scott Forsman Elementary Science Series. They are much less dogmatic on evolution than the others we reviewed. So why reinvent the wheel? These folks are doing it, you know, take advantage of what they're doing. They also do a lot of work with the history books. Mr. Fry, I forget his first name now, works with the Gablers. He's not Gary Fry, it's a different Fry. But he is a incredibly intelligent man, and he reads all these history books and finds mistakes. That's the wrong date here, that's the wrong date there, and, you know, and just loads these books down with, says, look, we can't buy this book because it's inaccurate. Okay? Adolf Hitler is quoted as saying, let me control the textbooks and I will control the state. How many kids go through your class at Woodham High School and believe what they're taught? Probably all of them. They should be able to, shouldn't they? Shouldn't the kid be able to go to class, read the book, listen to the teacher, and believe it? I mean, you don't need to be a genius to figure this out. That's the way it's supposed to be in school. So what can we do to help fix the problem? Bert Wagner, here's his address or email and phone number. Bert can help you get creation materials into your public school libraries. Many public schools, in their public school library, or even in the public libraries, have nothing about creation. Nobody has pushed to get it in there. Get some videotapes. He's gotten my videotapes into many public school libraries. And we probably get a call or letter, average of one a week, from somebody, a student or a parent getting saved from watching one of my videos that they checked out of their public school library. Now, some schools, some people have called me and said, I've tried and I can't get them in. Bert knows how to do it. There's red tape you got to cut through. He can do it, okay? He can get the stuff in there. Some practical things to do. You can demand that pages with false information be cut out. That doesn't cost anything. You could probably find 100 volunteers in your church or in your area who would help cut the pages out. Now, if you're asking for pages with lies to be cut out, is that trying to get the Bible in? Is that trying to get creation in? No, I'm just trying to get the poison out of the books, that's all. Who can argue with that? You got to have them glue the pages together. Somebody called me and said, Brother Hovind, a principal in our town, in Georgia, I forget what town now, over the summer, found the pages with false information and glued them together. That fall, the NEA hit the ceiling. That's the National Teachers Association, the National Education Association. They said, you can't do that. He said, well, I did. They said, but you can't. He said, well, I did. It's done, over with. The glue dried. Okay, it's too late. Just do it, okay? Get the stuff out of there. You can put a warning sticker in the front cover. Alabama, Becky, you know where the warning stickers are in the drawer out there? Alabama, Martha has a file. Make a note. Let's give one of those to each of the students here in the class. And probably, if we have enough, let's, as people take this course, let's maybe send one with them. Alabama requires that sticker to be put in the front of every book. If the book discusses evolution, it must have a warning sticker, like a pack of cigarettes, you know, warning, this has been determined to be hazardous to your health. Textbooks that teach evolution ought to have this warning sticker. Now, Alabama requires it, but they don't all do it, because some of the Christians in Alabama are too worried about who wins that dumb ball game, and they're not paying attention to what's going on in their schools. But they ought to be suing the schools if they don't obey the law. Put that stuff in there. I put that sticker in there. You might want to get my little brainwash booklet. We update this very regularly. If you buy them in quantity, they're $1 a piece. That's our printing cost, okay? You could get these brainwashed booklets and buy one for every student in your school and give one to every kid in class. Many people have done this. One guy ordered 500, passed them out to the whole school up in, I think, Minnesota, if I recall. And he said the teachers are having an awful time because every time they bring up something on evolution, 10 of the kids will say, excuse me, that was proven wrong back in, you know, blah, blah, blah. Why is it still in their books, you know? If you get an educated student body, it's going to be real frustrating on somebody who tries to push off a lie on them. Which goes back to, number one, let's reach them person by person, one by one. All right? Florida has a law requiring textbooks to be accurate. It's Florida Statute 233.09. Florida statute has this law that says all instructional materials recommended by each council for use in the schools shall be, to the satisfaction of each council, accurate. Anybody see a problem with this? The books have to be accurate as long as the council thinks they're accurate. That sentence ought to be stricken from the law. Textbooks ought to be accurate, period. Because the way this is written, all you have to do is get, you know, a majority of the council to think something is good when it's not, and we're stuck with it. That's what's happened in Florida here. It's sad to say that law needs to be rewritten. So some of you congressmen and senators that might watch this tape, fix it for me, please. All right, that's your job. In Texas, Title 19, Education 66.66 I or L, I don't remember, says instructional materials shall present the most factual information accurately and objectively without editorial opinion or bias by the authors. Theories shall be clearly distinguished from facts and presented in an objective manner. Well, that's the Texas law, but Texas doesn't do it. So some folks in Texas ought to go to their school and say, look, you're not obeying the law. Would you like to fix this, or should we go to court and talk about this? I don't know of any cases where evolution has ever been taken to court. Creation has been on the witness stand where they had to defend creation. If evolution had to be defended, it would lose. But nobody ever approaches it that way. Look, evolution is a lie. If you have some evidence for it, I'd like to see it. If you don't have any evidence for it, then quit teaching it. Get it out of the textbooks, okay? In Wisconsin, Administrative Code 361 says the textbooks shall have factual accuracy. Well, if you're teaching the kid we have gill slits, that's not accurate. Okay? Cut the page out of the book. In Alabama, here's part of that sticker. Alabama Code 1975 says adequate textbooks provide all students in the public schools shall be provided with adequate and current textbooks. One might argue that textbooks that contain statements and examples that are proven to be false and fraudulent are neither adequate nor current. Here's the sticker. This textbook discusses evolution, a controversial theory some scientists present as a scientific explanation for the origin of living things. No one was present when life first appeared on Earth. Therefore, any statements about life's origins should be considered as theory, not fact. Microevolution, which can be described as a fact, it discusses that in the sticker, I shortened it here, and macroevolution has never been observed and should be called a theory. Stephanie Bell on the Alabama State School Board, I believe, is the one responsible for pushing this through. And she did a great job. Here's her phone number if you want help to do it in your state. Okay, get a hold of Stephanie and say, what can I do? All right, California code requires textbooks shall be factually accurate and incorporate principles of instruction reflective of current and confirmed research. Well, should they include the gill slits? Should they include the horse evolution? Should they include the tailbone being vestigial? Or the appendix being vestigial? Look, many states already have the laws. We just have to require that they be enforced. Okay? Do something about it. Let's fix it. You might want to get students this little booklet, Students' Legal Rights. We offer it through our ministry. It's like $10. It's, you can get a hold of ACLJ, American Center for Law and Justice. That's Jay Sekulo's organization in Atlanta, Atlanta, Virginia Beach. ACLJ, Virginia Beach. Their organization will help in defending Christians who are discriminated against because of their religion. This book, though, on page 53, tells students you have the right to be exempt from anything against your religion. You could go down to the school board at Woodham High School or go down to the principal and say, it has to be in writing, I do not want my son taught I do not want my son taught evolution. Period. Notarize it. My secretary is a notary. Bring it in, we'll notarize your statement. Give it to him. They have to then exempt him from that class. Now, they'll give him other material. You don't just get out of work and go to study hall, okay? But suppose 70% of the class does that. Teacher gets up, there's going to be a section on evolution. All the kids say, I need to be excused. And they're standing out in the hall. It won't take them too long to figure out, you know, we really ought to skip this section. Because nobody's here anyway, right? Students ought to be informed, you have the right to do this. If you don't know your rights, you might as well not have them. If people just knew their rights and stood up for what was right. One guy gets stopped by police officers, he'll say, oh, am I being arrested? No. Well, then am I free to go? No. Oh, then I'm being arrested. Arrested means stopped. No, you're not arrested. Well, then can I go then? Just back and forth like that. I don't know if you want to do all that or not, but that's what he does. Now, here's some pitfalls to watch out for. If a school is going to have a good program, I speak in lots of public schools, very frequently they will make it an opt-in. In other words, the kid has to take a note home and get it signed, or else they can't come to the program. And how many kids take a note home and forget to bring it back? We had, what was his name today, sitting there, came over to visit today, 4 years old, has a note pinned on the back of his shirt. That way it's sure to get home and it's sure to get back. You know, pin it on the back. The kid forgets he's got it back there. How many notes did you forget to get signed and get in trouble for? Lots of them, right? See, they always make it an opt-in program. If the bad guys don't want the kids to hear this, but the school's going to have this program anyway, let's make sure the kids have to, make it hard for the kids to go see this. Now, if it's going to be a bad program, if they're going to have a homosexual come speak on, you know, queer lifestyle or something, they will make sure it is an opt-out program. In other words, everybody has to come unless you have a note not to come. Now, that is totally unfair, but that's the way it happens. And we ought to be up in arms and say, look, we're not going to allow that at this school. Let's have a level playing field. Okay? Everybody ought to be, these ought to all be the same. None of this opt-in, opt-out kind of stuff. Now, kids, let me encourage you, if you go to public school, don't confront your teacher publicly if possible. Okay? Talk to them after class. No teacher responds well to a public confrontation in front of their students. Number two, if you're late to class frequently, or the troublemaker or the goof-off in class, if you don't do your homework and you don't pay attention, please don't tell them you're a Christian. Okay? You're not helping. You should be a good student. I recommend you do this. If a test question comes up, for instance, in this biology book that you have, you know the answer that they want from the book because you've done your homework, right? You can simply say, the textbook says, blah, 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 blah. However, this is not correct and has been proven wrong, you know. Preach to them. Now, this way, the teacher knows, hey, I learned it, but I didn't swallow it. They can require you to learn it. They can't require you to believe it. When I became a Christian, a sophomore year in high school, I was in English class. My English teacher was evil, wicked, vile, godless, okay? And always giving us assignments to write, and kids would write just really bad stuff, you know. I decided, hey, I'm going to write all papers on Christianity, how to get saved. I would try, it didn't matter what the assignment was, I would try to twist it around and get the gospel in there somehow, okay? And then I asked Tom, who sat next to me, I said, Tom, would you proofread my paper for me? It's due tomorrow. Tom Pisano, you preached at his church. Reading all my English papers my sophomore year in high school got Tom interested in the gospel. Tom came to church with me and got saved. Then Tom brought his neighbor and his best friend John with him to church, and John got saved, and John and I went off to Bible college together. Tom ended up, he's now pastoring a church. I've preached there and you've preached there, right? Tom Pisano in East Peoria, Illinois, Creve Coeur, Illinois. It's from that English class, okay? So learn the material, but do not swallow it. You can ask to be exempt. Of course, you have this legal right to do that. I think some practical steps to follow. You can give your teacher a video to watch at home. Video is a great way to get people converted. People, especially men, okay, when they're sitting at home holding the remote, the feeling of power comes over them, okay? Nobody's been able to give it a word yet, but there's got to be a name for this. But there's a real, how many know what I'm talking about, okay? That feeling of power that you get when you're holding the remote control. Men will get saved watching a videotape that you would never get to come to church. Teachers will get converted by watching a video that you never would have got to church. You can invite people to a creation seminar. There are scores of creation scientists speaking all over the country all the time. I speak 700 times a year. I'm probably going to be in your town eventually. Okay, so watch my website, drdino.com, or watch the website from ICR. They send out 4 or 5 different speakers. Frank Riddle is a great guy. I spoke to many. He's been to our house here a couple times. He speaks for ICR, goes out and travels. Frank Sherwin used to live here in Pensacola and taught at Pensacola Christian College. He came and did a lot of video or audio taping here with me, broadcasts on creation evolution. He called himself Has Nonum, has no name, because he didn't want to get fired at the school for, you know, coming over here. A long story there. But anyway, there are great speakers out there speaking on creation science. Invite, you know, some of your teachers or schools to some of these seminars. Schedule a debate in your area. The student in Pennsylvania, I talked to him today, Joe Baker. One junior student, or senior, junior I think he is fired up on creation. I mean, real fired up. He scheduled me to come speak at his high school. The auditorium seats about 900 or 1,100. 1,500 were in the auditorium. I mean, seated all down the aisles, lined down the aisles, all across the back, and they turned away over 300 people. They wouldn't let them in. The principal was about to pull his hair out. He said, the fire marshal's going to throw me in jail for the rest of my life, you know. One high school kid did that, scheduled the whole thing, arranged it, promoted it. He would put up posters all over the campus. He'd go back an hour later and they were all torn down, so he'd put up more. People are going behind him, tearing down the posters. It was really, and there is still a battle in that school. But that one meeting, I just flew up for one day and flew back home. That's all I had time to schedule. Couldn't go for a whole weekend, you know. But anybody can do that. You can have your teachers call me with any questions. Okay, I talk to teachers a lot. We've had thousands of teachers. You can look through our testimony file. We've had thousands of teachers get converted to be creationists from watching our material. You can watch Ken Ham's material. He's got great stuff, or ICR, or there's others out there speaking on creation, okay? Get them to come. Get your teacher to show a creation video in class. Teachers need to learn what students learn early in life. It's easier to get forgiveness than permission. Okay, don't ask if you can do it, just do it, all right? Many people have told me they show my videos in their class and the kids love it. They don't ask it. The farther up the chain you go to get to permission, the less likely you are to get it. Because those people up there got the higher salaries and they got to watch their backside, make sure nobody, you know, they don't want to lose that cush job they have, so they don't want to rock the boat in any way. So just flat do it, all right? You could run for school board. Anybody could do that. Get on the school board. You could require that they teach the truth. Enforce the laws that are already probably on the books. Get on your curriculum committee. Some of you could get on the state textbook selection committee. Well, I've erased it now, but man, make the laws, make the state requirements reasonable to get this stuff out. The Bible says the fear of man bringeth a snare. We need to get some people that just say, I don't care what anybody thinks, I'm going to do what's right. I think a logical step is convert the students, one at a time. You could write letters to the editor. Everybody ought to be doing that. That's what started my whole ministry here. I came to Pensacola, started writing letters to the editor about creation and evolution. Nearly all of them are in my seminar notebook. You can read my original letters that I wrote to the Pensacola newspaper. I started getting calls saying, hey, could you come speak at our place on creation? You could donate some books to your library, to public library, school library. Get some creation material in there. I think we need to be using creation as a means of evangelism. It is a great way to do it. In the book of Acts, there are two great sermons. Acts chapter 2, Peter preached to the Jews on Mars Hill. The Jews are very, very familiar with Scripture. He quoted Scripture after Scripture after Scripture. That's what they're used to. Acts chapter 17, Paul's preaching on Mars Hill to a bunch of heathen who don't know about Scripture, never heard of it, and don't care. He never quoted any Bible verses. He talked about creation. Paul said in Acts 17, I want to talk to you about the unknown God. God that made the world. Starts right off with creation. Have you seen the movie Etau? Remember that? The missionaries go to, and they go to this tribe of folks, and they've never seen a white man, you know, and they just start with the gospel. They give them the gospel by starting in Genesis. Teach the whole Bible story. A great way to get folks who have no concept of Christianity to understand how it all fits together. I think creation evangelism is the need of the 20th and 21st century, in my humble opinion. Romans chapter 1 says, the invisible things of Him from the creation of the world are clearly seen. So they are without excuse. Nobody's going to have an excuse and say, I believed in evolution because I didn't see any evidence for a creator. There is overwhelming evidence for a creator. Okay, that's some practical things you can do. Now, next week, we're going to start talking about what this evolution theory has done for the world. The effects of teaching this theory. We've been teaching so far, what's on my videotape number 4, the lies in the textbooks. The fact is, they're still being taught. They're going to be taught tomorrow in your classroom. Giving you some practical things to do about it. But now I want to talk about what effect does this have? How has this theory of evolution influenced the rise of communism, socialism, Marxism, the New World Order? You fellows in the military, most of the threat we've had for the last 50 years or 70 years has been from communism. All of that's based on evolution. You were raised in Ukraine, you know, so were you. You were born over there, right? You were born over here? California. Your parents raised in Ukraine. You were born in Ukraine. Soviet and former communist countries, all of communism and all of the suffering and everything they've gone through, I'm convinced is all because of this theory of evolution. We're going to cover how the evolution theories led to the rise of Adolf Hitler. Nazism is based solidly on this same idea. See, ideas have consequences. What you believe determines how you behave. If you're raised in a headhunting society, where they, you know, cannibal society, like the book Peace Child, excellent book, by the way. If you teach your kids from the time they're born, hey, boy, kids, now listen, when we go to war and you fight against the enemies, if you kill one of them, be sure to cut his head off and eat his brains, because then you will get his spirit, and you'll be twice as strong. Well, of course, that's not true, but if the kid's taught that from the time he's little, guess what he's going to do when he goes to battle and kills somebody? He's going to do what he was taught. Ideas have serious consequences. And this evolution is not just a dumb theory, it's a dangerous philosophy. We're going to start on that. It'll be very politically incorrect, I assure you, starting next week. Thank you so much. Welcome to CSE 103. This is our Creation Science Evangelism class, so we've already covered much of my videotape seminar on creation, evolution, dinosaurs in the Bible. I taught school 15 years. I don't think I ever taught a class sitting down. This will be my first. You're going to need to sit down for this one. If you're watching this on videotape, this will be very politically incorrect. We're going to cover how the theory of evolution ties in with communism, Marxism, Nazism, racism, the New World Order coming soon to a city near you. We will discuss some things that I'm sure some people will get upset about. Feel free to call me. I try to document everything I say. I have read mountains of books on this topic. So this ought to be very interesting on what's coming soon. People are nervous. What's going on in the world? You know, it just seems like there's a race toward a one world government. Well, the Bible predicted this would happen 2,000 years ago, and it's happening. We are seeing it now. What we're going to try to cover in this class is what's going on, give you a little historical perspective, and then tell you what you should do about it. Yes, we have a new world order coming. It's going to be evil. It's going to be wicked. Christians are going to be persecuted and killed. It's coming. What should we do about it? You folks in the military are going to be required to do things that you shouldn't do. What's your decision going to be? So, let's get started here. Evolution, Satan's religion, to destroy humanity. During the Civil War, a fellow decided he did not want to get involved in the war. The battlefield was moving his way, the battle was, and so he didn't want to get involved. So the guy put on a Yankee coat and rebel pants and decided, now nobody will bother me. They'll think, you know, I'm on both sides. Well, after the war, after the battle, he was found dead with his Yankee coat full of rebel bullets and his rebel pants full of Yankee bullets. You better get on one side or the other, because somebody's going to lose, all right? So we're going to try to give you the big picture here. About 6,000 years ago, 4,000 BC roughly, God created everything in 6 days. That means he owns it. He's the boss. He's the master. Within the first few hundred years, Satan fell from heaven, apparently. The only reason we say within 100 years is because Adam was 130 when Seth was born. That's the first really date we have to go by. Before that, they had Cain and Abel. No dates are given. Before that, they were kicked out of the garden. And they were kicked out of the garden because Lucifer had deceived them, you know, and talked them into eating the fruit and all that stuff. Actually, he deceived Eve. Adam purposely ate the fruit to save his wife. The Bible tells us that in 1 Timothy. So Lucifer probably fell from heaven about 100 years after the creation. We know he hadn't fallen during the first week or after the first week, because if you look at Genesis 1:31, at the end of chapter 1, God looked at everything, said it's very good. It was not very good if Satan had fallen from heaven and is running around as a bad guy. Plus, there'd be no possible way God could say, Adam, you have dominion over the earth, if Lucifer already had dominion over the earth. You know? Plus, we know from Ezekiel 28, Lucifer was in Eden until iniquity was found in him. So those are the different clues you can put together and come up with a date of about 100 years after creation when Lucifer decided to rebel. And we'll get into more of that in a minute. So Lucifer wants to be God. And what we're going to discuss in this class, for the next many classes probably, is Satan's attempt to create a one world government, a new world order, coming soon. So let's try to put it in perspective here. It appears that Satan wants to do at least three things on this planet. Number one, he wants to make mankind wicked, so God will have to destroy them. Satan knows God cannot tolerate sin, and so he's going to try to make everybody wicked and vile, and then God will have to kill them, which is what happened in the flood in the days of Noah. Second thing he wants to do, he wants to make as many men destroy other men. If he can put it into the head of one fella, hey, I want you to kill everybody else so you can have the whole planet, or so you can have all the gold, or so you can have all the whatever, you know. If people kill people, this ties right into Satan's plan also, and so he's working very hard to accomplish that goal. The third thing he seems to be doing, he wants to keep as many people as possible from hearing the gospel. This would be where repressive regimes like communism come in, where you simply never get an opportunity to hear the gospel because, you know, it's banned in your country. So those type of repressive regimes are part of Satan's plan to keep people from hearing the gospel. Satan has used all kinds of different methods and people to accomplish his goals. As you read through Scripture, you'll see different times where there were attempts to make a one world government or a new world order, and we'll get into lots more on that, hopefully, as the class progresses. If he knew if he could make man think he was God, then that would create some real serious problems. Because if there is no God to tell us what to do, if man is God, then how do you decide right from wrong? Well, the toughest man decides. You know, might makes right. Whoever has the biggest gun, you know, he's in charge, kind of thing. And so that ties right into Satan's plan also to help destroy humanity and further destroy the world, and leads to things like genocide, which we'll get into here during this session. So the problem basically is very simple. We are in the center of the battlefield in the greatest war in history. This is Satan versus God. The battlefield is us. We're in the middle of it. All you need to do is simply decide which side you want to be on, find out what your general wants you to do, and do it. It's just that simple. There's a war going on against God. Henry Morris has a great book called The Long War Against God. And they had an older, the different cover was different before, but now they've changed it to this one, The Long War Against God. And this is one of the books you can read to do a report on for this class. Absolutely one of the best books I've ever read. Henry Morris traces the history of evolutionary thought all through the last 6,000 years. And we're going to concentrate primarily on just the last 200 years on this class, but we'll give you just a quick overview of some of the rest. Christians already have an incredible advantage over anybody else in the world on this topic. When you discuss what's happening and what to do, we've got a book, the perfect book, the Bible, that already told us what's going to happen. We already know the end. We know the final result. You see, I read the last chapter and we win. So It's nothing to get nervous about. I get a lot of people come to my seminars when I talk about the New World Order, and they leave nervous. Oh, wow, the world's falling apart. Well, I suppose if you study this kind of topic, you could really get nervous when you study what happened at Waco, what really happened at Waco, like the Waco whitewash, and how the people were just, murdered at Waco and what the government did. When you study about the Jekyll Island, what happened with the Federal Reserve and how we got a Federal Reserve system, and now we no longer have any money. We have paper we carry around, and we think it's money still. Hasn't been money in 70 years. They've got all the gold, we're carrying around some paper thinking, wow, I got money. And you don't have a dime. They've stolen us, they've robbed us blind. When you get into subjects, Des Griven, awesome book, The Fourth Reich of the Rich. We can go on, and I read lots and lots of books about the New World Order. And it's enough to give, make you nervous, unless you keep in perspective Psalms chapter 2. God is laughing at their plans for toy one world government. So the more I learn about the New World Order, it is tempting to get nervous and scared about what's going on. But like, God knows, and He's not nervous. He's laughing at the whole thing because He knows we win. So keep that in perspective. So if you go through part of this class, you may leave going home scared, nervous, saying, "Wow, the world's falling apart. The sky is falling. What do we do?" It'll be fine in the end. Okay, just read the last chapter. We win. So we're going to trace a little bit of the history of this war, so you can understand what we should do for our general, and relieve your fears about what may happen in the future. God created the world. He owns it. He makes the rules. Genesis 1:1. In the beginning, God created the heaven and the earth. The earth is the Lord's, and the fullness thereof, the world and they that dwell therein. Everything belongs to God, Psalm 24 tells us. So about 6,000 years ago or so, Lucifer decided he should be God. In Ezekiel 8:28, it tells us the story. Thou, talking about Lucifer, wast perfect in thy ways from the day that thou wast created, till iniquity was found in thee. I don't claim to understand everything that happened here, how Satan rebelled, or what exactly happened in heaven, but it appears that Satan rebelled first, decided he wanted to be God, apparently. His heart was lifted up. The Bible says in Ezekiel 28:17, the heart was lifted up because of thy beauty. Thou hast corrupted thy wisdom by reason of thy brightness. I will cast thee down to the ground. I will lay thee before kings, that they may behold thee. How art thou fallen from heaven, O Lucifer, son of the morning? How art thou cut down to the ground, which didst weaken the nations? For thou hast said in thine heart, I will ascend into heaven. I will exalt my throne above the stars of God. I will sit upon the mount of the congregation in the sides of the north. I will ascend above the heights of the clouds. I will be like the Most High. This is the best glimpse we have from Scripture of what's going on in the mind of Satan. 5 times he said, I will. He's exerting his will. He wants to be God, according to the book of Ezekiel. The next verse tells us, though, yet thou shalt be brought down to hell, to the sides of the pit. He's going to lose. They that see thee shall narrowly look upon thee and consider thee, saying, is this the man that made the earth to tremble, that did shake kingdoms? Whenever I read this verse, I think about the Wizard of Oz. You know the movie Wizard of Oz, and everybody is scared stiff of the Oz, and they go in there and you see this huge face and the flames coming out, and the cowardly lion, and they all take off running, and dive through the window and the whole thing. At the end of the movie, you find out Oz is nothing but a little bitty guy behind the curtain pulling some levers. I think at the end of history, we're going to find out Satan is a puny little fella, and we're going to marvel and say, this is the guy that caused all this trouble on the earth? This is him? Come on, you got to be kidding. We're just going to be amazed at what a wimp he is when he's cast down into hell. Meantime, he's pulling the levers and making the smoke and the fires and the flames and scaring everybody half to death, and people are scared stiff of the devil. Okay, next verse says, this is the man that made the world as a wilderness and destroyed the cities thereof and opened not the house of his prisoners. Well, we can talk a long time on this verse. Satan takes people prisoner to different things like drugs, alcohol, and it's tough to get them away. How many people do you know that have died of a habit like that they were made a prisoner, some kind of habit, then you just can't get them away. Many people get hooked on drugs and they never can get off. You can get hooked on just about anything and get that way. But while Satan and his followers are making their plans to rule the world, like Pinky and the Brain, how many have seen the cartoon Pinky and the Brain? It's 2 mice. They decide they're going to go out and capture the world, Every night they've got their plans to go out and rule. We're going to destroy the world. That's what Satan's doing, just like Pinky and the Brain. God is up in heaven laughing. Psalms chapter 2. Why do the heathen rage and the people imagine a vain thing? The kings of the earth set themselves, the rulers take counsel together against the Lord, against his anointed, saying, let us break their bands asunder and cast away their cords from us. Basically that means I'm throwing off God's control. He that sitteth in the heavens shall laugh. The Lord shall have them in derision. God is not nervous, He's not scared, and we don't need to be either. It started on earth. I'm not sure of all the details of how it happened in heaven, but apparently Lucifer fell from heaven, tried to rebel against God in heaven. He then was cast down to the earth. But he still has access to heaven. He goes back and forth. Job tells us that, Job chapter 1 and chapter 2. But while on earth, the first thing he did was go to Eve. I think that's interesting. He went to Eve, not Adam. Eve is the only one that did not see God create anything. God made Adam, then He put him in the garden, and then God made trees to grow in front of Adam. Now the rest of the world was already full of trees from day 3. But here God is making some more trees in chapter 2. God also made one more of each of the animals in chapter 2. Some people say there's 2 different accounts and they contradict chapter 1 and chapter 2. That is not true. We'll get into more of that on video number 7 of our series, our regular normal creation series, but it'll probably be 2 years. This class is going to take a while, I'm afraid, before we get to that. But there's no contradiction. God made one more of each animal and some more of each of the plants so that Adam could name them and so that Adam could see that God indeed is the one who's doing the creating. If God had made Adam last, Lucifer could walk up and say, "Hey Adam, how you like my garden I made here?" How would Adam know? The fact is, Adam knew because he saw God make some stuff. Now Eve never did that. Satan came to Eve and tricked her, and then she sinned, disobeyed God. She says, "Hey Adam, you want some of this?" Whatever it was, fruit, apple, banana, we don't know. Everybody says apple, but the Bible does not say that, okay? And Adam looked at it and said, "Oh, you numbskull, look what you did. Now we're in trouble." He knew God was going to have to punish his wife, going to have to kill her. He knew he loved his wife. The only way to save his wife was for him to become sin like her. And now whatever God does, you got to do it to both of us. So he voluntarily took of the fruit, ate it, knowing full well what he was doing. 1 Timothy tells us that. And he became sin to save his wife, just like Christ voluntarily became sin to save us on the cross. So in Genesis chapter 3, we see Lucifer, whose later name was changed to Satan, deceiving Eve. Now I need to point out, some of the groups today are teaching that Lucifer is the good God and Jehovah is the bad God. You get into the Masonic Lodge, you won't find out till you get way up to the top. And they say, they pray to God. You won't find out till you get to, and you may never find out. If they don't think you can handle the information, you'll never be exposed to the fact that Lucifer is God in the Masonic religion. So they'll say, "Oh, we believe in God." Sure. "You believe God answers prayer?" Sure we do. And the whole time they're talking about Lucifer. We'll get into it. I'll show you some quotes from their own literature later on in this session on video, what's covered on video number 5 or CSE 103. Okay, so the serpent, Lucifer, said to the woman, "Yea, hath God said?" It's interesting, the first thing he did was to raise doubts. This is exactly what the liberal preachers do today. They will try to raise doubts about God's Word. That's what they do with all these new translations of the Bible. "Well, how do you know it really says that? It says in my Bible this, and your Bible says this. How do you know who's right?" This is the same tactic to raise doubts. And we can go off on a long rabbit trail of why the King James over other versions, if you'd like. We'll cover that later on when we get to what's on our video number 7 in our series. And there are people who have, that's their whole ministry. I collect different versions of the Bible. I have probably, 25 or 30 or 40 of them, I don't know. But there are some serious problems with a lot of the new versions. And I think you'd be real wise to study this topic out before you decide which version of the Bible you're going to study from. I was saved by somebody leading me to the Lord from a Revised Standard Version, one of the most liberal ones there is. I've led people to the Lord from a Jehovah's Witness Bible. There's enough gospel in there, you can get them saved, okay? You can get them saved out of the Catholic Bible, okay? It can be done. There's still enough gospel left in there, but there are some real serious problems with them, and I think save that for another time. But the idea of these different translations causes people to doubt. "Yea, hath God said?" It does that. And this has been Satan's attack on God's Word for quite a while. Then the next thing he said to the woman, he said, "Ye shall not surely die." He's gone from just raising doubts, hath God said, to denial. So the 3 steps here are always the same. First, raise doubts. Be a good quiz question, Marlissa. Raise doubts. Satan works this way. Then, deny. Then, deify. Doubt, deny, and deify man. Next thing he said was, For God doth know that in the day ye eat thereof, then your eyes shall be opened, and ye shall be as gods. Wow, I get to be God? Who would not like to be God? I mean, nobody tells you what to do. Like the one kid we had in our school in Illinois, he said, I'm sick of my parents telling me what to do. I'm going to join the Marines. Boy, are you brilliant. The idea of, everybody would like that, I would think, nobody tells me what to do. I'm God of the universe, and so sure enough, that's what the lie was here. He said, ye shall be as gods. Look at the next part though. Knowing good and evil. What Satan always promises is extra knowledge. You get to know something that nobody else knows. That's what all the secret lodges do. You come to the meeting, you learn something, you hold your hand and you shake hands, you put the second finger right here, grab the second knuckle, and you stand like this, and you go like this when you're in distress, and the judge, if he's a Mason, has to help you. And they got all these secret signs and symbols. We'll get into more of that later. But the idea is, they think, I know something the average person doesn't know. I have knowledge, you don't. I'm smart, you're dumb. I get this in debates all the time when I debate against professors who believe in evolution. And very frequently they will say something and I'll have to translate it for the audience. They'll say, well, the average person doesn't understand how technical this topic is. So I'll say, folks, what he means is, he's smart and you're dumb. How many times have you heard me say that in debates? That's exactly what they're doing. When you see this in letters to the editor or books about evolution, the average person doesn't comprehend, but now basically they're saying, if you don't believe in like we believe, then you're dumb. And Satan always does this. He promises, you follow me and you will have knowledge. The light. That's why he's Lucifer, the light bearer. I will bring you more knowledge, more wisdom, more light. We can go off. There's beautiful sermons been preached for years and years on that topic. How Lucifer promises more light, more knowledge. Next verse. This fellow in American Humanist said, the turning point in history will be the moment that man becomes aware that the only God of man is man himself. The humanist religion teaches man is God. We're it. There is no deity to save us, so we must save ourselves. That's in the Humanist Manifesto. 1933, the first Humanist Manifesto was written, and then the second one came out in 1973. Many famous people that if I listed the names, you would say, wow, I know that one. I know that one. John Dewey, for instance, the guy responsible for the type of education system we have today. Our modern public school system with the progressive education was John Dewey. And he was one of the signers of the Humanist Manifesto. Basically, the idea of humanism is there is no God, and so we must be God. After all, we're the highest evolved creature there is, so we're probably it. And that's the idea behind humanism. So, getting Eve to believe she was God was the beginning of a strategy that Satan would use for the next 6,000 years. This whole idea that man gets to decide right from wrong. Tell me, what is the basis of a democracy? Man's opinion. The majority decides right from wrong. So when they get together in Congress or in the Senate and they're voting on a law, some people say you can't legislate morality. That's all Congress does all day long. Every law legislates morality. There's no such thing as a law that doesn't legislate morality. You're telling somebody else what to do. That's what all laws do, okay? So don't give me this, you can't legislate morality stuff. The idea that man decides right from wrong is flawed from the start. Because if that's true, if evolution is true, if there is no God, Adolf Hitler was right. He decided, most of our folks here are Aryan, Germans, blonde-haired, blue-eyed, and we voted that everybody else ought to be killed. Hey, majority decided. What you need is a different standard to say, thus saith the Lord, is how you decide. When I was at the cabinet shop, we had a problem. We were building real fancy display cases for Gafers and Saks Fifth Avenue and stuff like that. And we had a problem because we were building these cases that were curved and they had to go around and end up at the other side and match. Well, if every one isn't curved just right, it comes around and doesn't match. And so here I was in charge of the first department that cut out the wood and put them together. We sent it on to get the lamination and paint and lights put in and stuff like that. And we were having a problem. It wasn't bad, but they were coming off. They were off by, say, half an inch by the time they got around the circle. So I traced the problem down as I racked my brain over it and found out that every person in my department was measuring their pieces as they cut it. The rulers were slightly different. All it needs is a 1/8 of an inch difference on somebody's ruler from his ruler and your ruler. Suppose I told, we're going to get all the guys together in the church and we're going to build an auditorium, and I'm going to give everybody a tape measure, but every tape measure is vastly different. On some tape measures, this is an inch. On other ones, this is an inch. How's that building going to turn out?
Wow.
Pretty bad, if it'll turn out at all, right? So the idea is you have to have a standard. We have a National Bureau of Standards. They keep a meter stick in a carefully climate-controlled environment, and everybody makes copies of this meter stick. There's a standard meter. There's a standard foot, a standard yard, a standard pound, standard ounce. You have to have a standard. If you say, how much are you going to give me? Oh, I'll give you a lot. Well, how much is a lot? Well, you got to have some way to measure things. Okay, there's standards of for everything. And there needs to be a standard for determining right from wrong, and that's where the Bible comes in. But see, what evolution does, it takes away the Bible. Therefore, there is no more a standard. There's no longer a standard to decide right from wrong, so the majority of the people get together and vote on what they think is right and wrong. So if they vote, you think abortion's okay? Who thinks abortion's okay? Okay, majority rules. Now, wait a minute. That's why democracies are so dangerous. They never can last. They will always become a dictatorship. And I get real nervous when I hear leaders in our country saying, we're going to spread democracy around the world. Maybe the dumbest thing we could do. We need to spread righteousness around the world, spread godliness, but democracy is a horrible form of government because the majority can simply vote to annihilate the minority. Now, a republic is very different. A constitutional republic is what our founding fathers gave us. We'll get into more of that later. So, scores of people have made attempts to conquer and rule the world down through history. He wanted to use this idea that man can be God, and of course, whoever's in charge is God. They think they're God. Whoever has, the biggest gun or the biggest sword or the biggest club or the most people following him, he's God. Satan caused so many to be wicked in the days before the flood that God destroyed the world with a flood. God always has his faithful few, though, that disrupt Satan's plans. Here's what happened. God created the world. Satan became proud of his beauty, decided man should worship him. Satan rebelled against God, and he was cursed. And then God said, someday some seed of the woman is going to bruise your head. That's the first prophecy of the coming Messiah, Genesis 3:15, and there's been a war going on ever since. Here's the prophecy right here. In verse 14, the Lord God said unto the serpent, Satan, because thou hast done this, thou art cursed above all cattle and above every beast of the field. Upon thy belly shalt thou go, and dust shalt thou eat all the days of thy life. And I will put enmity between thee and the woman, between thy seed and her seed. It shall bruise thy head, and thou shalt bruise his heel. Most Bible scholars interpret this bruising the heel as Christ dying on the cross. A bruise to the heel hurts, but it's seldom fatal. You ever get a stone bruise by stepping on a rock and you limp around for days afterwards? But it's not fatal. Not many die from a bruise to the heel. A bruise to the head can be fatal. So most people have, for all of history, have interpreted this passage as Satan's going to be able to bruise the Christ at the cross. He's going to hurt him, but he came back from the dead. And now that seed of the woman is going to bruise his head. Not over yet. And the idea of Satan knows, some seed of the woman is going to bruise my head, crush my head. Somebody's going to do me in. So he decided to kill every human being on the planet. He wants to utterly destroy humanity any way he can. Just like when Herod wanted to kill baby Jesus in Bethlehem. He's only after one kid, but he killed them all. Now, Jewish tradition tells us about 22 babies were killed in Bethlehem. Bethlehem's a small town. There weren't a lot of kids under 2 years old. It wasn't like he killed thousands of people. And Herod later did get called in for that and got in trouble. There's a great book called the Archko volume that deals with that, about some of the archaeological findings. Have you got to read any of that yet, Eric? That is awesome. I read you the passage about the Christmas, didn't I? And that whole thing is about the arch. Anyway, we won't go off track here. So, just like Herod tried to kill all of the kids, he killed them all just to be sure to get the right one. Satan has decided he's going to kill every human being on the planet to try to, be sure he gets the right one, to thwart or upset God's plans. Satan decided to destroy every seed of the woman to save his own skin. He knew God could not tolerate sin. So he worked hard to make man sin, so God would have to destroy his own creation, make them corrupt if possible. Genesis 6:5. God saw the wickedness of man was great in the earth, and that every imagination of the thoughts of his heart was only evil continually. And it repented the Lord that he had made man on the earth, and it grieved him at his heart. And the Lord said, I will destroy man, whom I have created, from the face of the earth, both man and beast, and the creeping thing, and the fowls of the air, for it repenteth me that I have made them. But Noah found grace in the eyes of the Lord. Lord always has somebody. Remember when the prophet thought he was the only one alive that was serving God? He ran away, from Jezebel and ran for about 100 miles, I believe. And finally stopped under a juniper tree, and he's feeling bad, feeling sorry for himself. And the Lord said, hey, Elijah, I've got 7,000 that have not bowed the knee. You're not the only one. And about the time you feel like I'm the only one that loves God, there's a lot of people out there that love God. I'm an independent, temperamental, fundamental, right-wing, radical Baptist, but I'll be the first one to say there are some Lutherans that love God, and some Methodists, and some Presbyterians, and there are all kinds of denominations where there are folks that really, really love God and are really going to heaven. Now they have to join the Baptist church when they get there, but they do get to go. They do get to go to heaven. So, after the flood, Satan got right back to work corrupting people. It didn't take him but 100 years or so, and Nimrod comes along and decides, hey, God said spread out, take over the world. No, we're staying right here. I'm going to lead my kingdom. And he built the Tower of Babel, to get a new world order. Lots of folks have tried this. Tower of Babel, shortly after the flood. Now, the Bible, it doesn't tell us when, okay? You can get a few clues together and say probably within the first 200 or 300 years is when the Tower of Babel incident took place. Some people have speculated that when the Bible says in the days of Peleg, the earth was divided, that's talking about divided by languages. Some people think in the days of Peleg, the earth was divided as in they decided, hey, there's so many folks, we better survey the property and see who gets what. Divide the land up. This is your part, this is my part. Let's put up a few fences here, or put some borders up, okay? Some people think the continents moved. I don't buy that for a second, because if you move a continent 6 inches, it kills everybody on the world, It'd be a tidal wave, go around the world 10 times and kill everybody. So I don't think that's possible. But, some people really hold to that theory that the continents moved away from each other, and that would be, I think, tough to explain physically. There's all kinds of theories. We'll get into more of that later when we get into what's on video number 6 on our Hovind theory about the flood. But Tower of Babel was the first attempt after the flood to create a one world government. Then God divided them up by languages. They spread out, which is probably the best thing ever happened to humanity. Because you just can't get everybody together to develop a one world government. It's really tough. The language barrier has kept it from happening. So even though, you speak Russian and some people, and you work with people all day long, speak different languages, I know it's frustrating, but it's probably the best thing God could have done, to keep us from killing ourselves a long time ago. There would have been a world dictator a long time ago had it not been for that. So then you have Babylon. Nebuchadnezzar comes along as the first world ruler to conquer a large chunk of the world. There's an interesting story in the book of Daniel. If you're going to study prophecy, what's going to happen in the future, you really need to start with Daniel and then study Revelation. It's like the two books go together. God told Daniel to write this book. When Daniel got done, he said, Lord, what does this mean? The Lord said, Daniel, don't worry about it. Put the pen down. This is for the next, somebody else will finish this up. And then John comes along on the Isle of Patmos, 600 years later, and finishes the Revelation. So Daniel and Revelation go together and should be studied together. But here's the story. In Daniel chapter 2. In the 2nd year of the reign of Nebuchadnezzar, Nebuchadnezzar dreamed dreams, wherein his spirit was troubled, and his sleep brake from him. Then the king commanded to call the magicians, the astrologers, the sorcerers, the Chaldeans, for to show the king his dreams. So they came and stood before the king. And the king said unto them, I have dreamed a dream, and my spirit was troubled to know the dream. Then spake the Chaldeans to the king in Syriac, O king, live forever. Yeah, that'd be a wonderful thing, wouldn't it? They all say that. They don't really mean it. They hope he dies so they can be king. Right? O king, live forever. Tell thy servants the dream, and we will show the interpretation. And the king answered and said to the Chaldeans, the thing is gone from me. I don't remember the dream. And if ye will not make known unto me the dream with the interpretation thereof, ye shall be cut in pieces, and your houses shall be made a dunghill. In other words, you are in trouble, fellas, okay? And of course, you know the story. They couldn't tell the dream, so the king decided to start killing all the wise men. These guys are a bunch of fakes anyway, and they were. And along comes Daniel, Yeah, Daniel's in an unusual situation here. He and 7,000 of his schoolmates have been taken away from their home, taken away from their country. Probably their families were killed. Thousands and thousands were killed. They bring them to Babylon. These kids are all teenagers, 16, 17, 18 years old roughly. They make them eunuchs. Look that up in the dictionary. They give them different clothing to wear, make them learn a new language, and subject them to slavery. I mean, you have zero authority, zero rights. I mean, what future do you have? Daniel decides, hey, I'm going to make the best of a bad situation. I'm going to try to do the best I can. Sometimes you get yourself in a situation where you say, okay, I'm here, what do I do? Let's just do the best with what we got. Other people get in a bad situation, they get falsely accused, they end up in jail, and they get bitter. Some people get better, some get bitter. Joseph in the Bible is a good example. You know, he's falsely accused by his master's wife. Here he has already been sold by his brothers to be a slave. You know, things aren't going too well for Joseph in life. You know, ends up in jail for 13 or 17 years. I think he was 17 when he went, and he was in for 13 years, 30 altogether. 13 years in jail for doing nothing wrong. Decided, hey, let's make the best of it. Sometimes you just have to get yourself that attitude of, okay, things aren't going well, let's do the best we can. Johnny Erickson Tada, she was 17 or 18 years old, dove in, broke her neck, paralyzed, waist down. Neck down, yeah, neck down. What am I going to do? Well, let's learn how to type and let's write books. All you can do is move your head, you know, put the pencil in your mouth and type. Hey, okay, you can get bitter about it if you want, but you might as well get better and hey. And she paints, yeah, and has a radio program, you know, sweet, godly spirit. Anyway, so Daniel then comes in and says, hey, king, I can not only tell you what the dream was, I can tell you what it means. Now, as you read Daniel chapter 2, it's interesting. Daniel really gives a good testimony for the Lord. He said, it's not in me, O king. The God in heaven who rules everybody, including you, has told me this dream. Nebuchadnezzar didn't like the idea of anybody telling him what to do, but little Daniel, this eunuch servant boy, is about to tell the king a message from God. I love this chapter. We'll take that up after a quick break. Daniel chapter 2. Well, let's take up again here. Let's talk about Nebuchadnezzar's dream, what Daniel interpreted for him, and see how it ties into us today. Here's the go. Daniel chapter 2, verse 31. Thou, O king, sawest, and behold a great image. This great image, whose brightness was excellent, stood before thee, and the form thereof was terrible. The image's head was of fine gold, his breast and arms of silver, his belly and thighs of brass, his legs of iron, his feet part of iron and part of clay. Thou sawest till that a stone was cut out of the mountain, cut out without hands, which smote the image upon his feet, that were of iron and clay, and brake them to pieces. So the statue that he saw is basically the head of gold, chest and arms of silver, belly and thighs of brass, legs of iron, and feet of iron and clay mixed together. This was symbolic of the next 5 great kingdoms to come on earth. Later on, if you read the book of Daniel, Daniel says, Nebuchadnezzar, thou art the head of gold. Now it's interesting, each of these metals, gold, silver, brass, iron and clay, become less valuable. Gold is the most valuable, and Nebuchadnezzar had the most pure form of dictatorship, I guess. I mean, he was the law. They didn't vote on anything. All he had to do is decide, I want you to kill that guy right there. Yeah, but I'm going to appeal. To who? To me? Okay. Well, hear the case again. You're still going to the prison or whatever. You know. Nobody told him what to do. When you get to the arms of silver, you're talking about the Medo-Persian Empire, which was the second great world empire. They wanted to rule the world. But their king was not an absolute dictator. I mean, they had laws, and he had to abide by the law. And even when the king decided, he was tricked, and they were going to throw Daniel in the lion's den and all this stuff, the king was tricked and bound by his own laws. Nebuchadnezzar never would have been bound by his own laws. He just would simply change his mind. Then you get to the belly and thighs of brass. This is symbolic of the Empire of Greece, Alexander the Great, who ruled all the known world and died at age, 30 or 32, and said, oh, I wish I had more kingdoms to conquer. Nobody else to beat up. Got them all. But brass is not near as valuable as silver. Then you get to the legs of iron, and that, notice there are two legs. This most Bible scholars interpret as being the iron legions of Rome, which split into the eastern and western divisions, one at Rome and one at Constantinople. And then you get to the 10 toes on the image's feet, which has iron and clay mixed. Iron and clay don't mix. Partly strong, partly weak. This, almost all Bible scholars will tell you, is symbolic of the last kingdom that the world's going to see. Last human kingdom is going to be a revival of the Roman Empire. Probably something like the European Common Market. 10 kingdoms are going to get together, try to give all their power to one person, and it's not going to be very good. It's going to be a dud. See, the iron legions of Rome would just stomp on anybody who got in their way. They rolled over everybody that opposed them. The iron and clay mixed together, this final kingdom is going to be weak. A lot of people are really nervous about the New World Order and it's going to be iron and clay. Okay, it's not going to work. It's going to rule for a short time and be destroyed by the stone cut out without hands. Now that's interesting. Jesus Christ is the chief cornerstone. We'll get into more of that later. In Daniel chapter 2, verse 35, it says, "Then was the iron, the clay, the brass, and the silver, and the gold broken to pieces." Now remember, the stone cut out from the mountain, we see later, hit the image on the feet and crumbled the entire thing, all the way up to the head. This is Nebuchadnezzar's thinking, wow, that's right, I remember that in the dream. Yeah, that's right, See, he had forgotten the dream and sure didn't know what it meant. All he knew was he woke up scared, So Daniel's telling him the dream and telling him what it means. Let's keep reading here. "Broken to pieces together and became like the chaff of the summer threshing floors, and the wind carried them away, that no place was found for them. And the stone that smote the image became a great mountain, which filled the whole earth." This is going to be the kingdom of Jesus Christ. And you can go off into all sorts of rabbit trails here, how some people think that the Great Pyramid is symbolic of this, and Jesus, the chief cornerstone, was never put in place on the pyramid. Jesus Christ is the chief cornerstone. We'll get into more of that later as one of the theories of what this all might be talking about. Then Daniel said, "This is the dream." I like that kind of confidence, Hey, I'm just a little 17-year-old kid. I know you're King Nebuchadnezzar, but hey, this is how it is, fella. I do that in debates sometimes. I'm thinking, these guys are college professors. They've been teaching this stuff for 30 years, They're a lot smarter than I am. But look, fella, you're wrong. I'm right. Period. This is the dream. "And we will tell the interpretation thereof before the king. Thou, O king, art a king of kings. For the God of heaven hath given thee a kingdom, power, and strength, and glory. And wheresoever the children of men dwell, the beasts of the field, and the fowls of the heaven, hath he given into thine hand, and hast made thee ruler over them all. Thou art this head of gold. And after thee shall arise another kingdom, inferior to thee, and another third kingdom of brass, which shall bear rule over all the earth. And the fourth kingdom shall be strong as iron, for as much as iron breaketh in pieces, and subdueth all things. And as iron that breaketh all these, shall it break in pieces and bruise. And whereas thou sawest the feet and toes, part of potter's clay and part of iron, the kingdom shall be divided. But there shall be in it of the strength of the iron, for as much as thou saw the iron mixed with the miry clay. And as the toes of the feet were part of iron and part of clay, so the kingdom shall be partly strong and partly broken. And whereas thou sawest iron mixed with miry clay, they shall mingle themselves with the seed of men, but they shall not cleave one to another, even as iron is not mixed with clay. And in the days of these kings shall the God of heaven set up a kingdom." Okay, now right here, let's stop. This is an interesting prophecy. When the 10 kings get together and try to make their power, their world empire, this is when God's coming back. And he's going to set up his kingdom. So people who study scriptures are getting excited saying, boy, we must be getting awfully close. Now, the European Common Market might not even be. We might have 500 more years. Okay, what they're attempting to do in Europe with a unified Europe and all this, it may all fall apart. Okay, there have been many attempts at world empires before, and they have disintegrated. I would not stick my neck out and say, boy, this proves the Lord's coming back, tomorrow at 10 o'clock in the morning. I don't have a clue when he's coming, and we might have a long time. If the Jewish calendar is right, the Hebrew calendar, they say this is the year 5760. Well, then we've got, if 6,000 means anything, we've got 240 more years. One guy wrote a book, 88 reasons why the Lord will come in 88. Well, that was a while ago, he missed it. Then he revised it, and had a pamphlet out, 89 reasons why the Lord would come in 89.
And the 89th reason was?
I don't remember.
Because
He didn't come in 88. Was that the 89th reason? Okay. That's dumb. Okay, don't do that. I don't know when the Lord's coming. I tell people, we figure the Lord's coming back 2,000 years, from the birth of Christ. This is the year 2001 now, but the Lord might be, we know our calendar is 5 or 6 years off, okay? Not too many folks argue about that. Christ was born in 4, 5, or 6 BC. So our calendar is off for sure. So this is already the year 2007 or 8, okay? So we missed it, yeah. Well, the Lord might be coming back 2,000 years from the resurrection instead of from the birth. I mean, why would we figure from the birth of Christ? Why not from the resurrection? Or why not from the triumphal entry into Jerusalem? Maybe that's the significant. And I tell folks, I don't want to hurt anybody's feelings or disrupt anybody's book sales on 88 reasons why the Lord will come in 88, but maybe God's not even using your calendar. Maybe He has His own, okay? So don't sell your clothes and go stand on a mountain and say, okay, the Lord's coming today, now, because you might stand there embarrassed. Okay, let's go on here. And in these days shall the King of heaven, shall the God of heaven set up a kingdom, which shall never be destroyed. And the kingdom shall not be left to other people, but it shall break in pieces and consume all these kingdoms, and it shall stand forever. For as much as thou sawest that the stone was cut out of the mountain without hands, and that it brake in pieces the iron, the brass, the clay, the silver, the gold, the great God that hath made known to the king what shall come to pass hereafter. And the dream is certain, and the interpretation thereof sure. I like that confidence, man. Revelation continues the story. Daniel brought it up through the next 5 kingdoms, including one that still hasn't happened. The 5th kingdom, we assume to be the revival of the Roman Empire. Somehow, these 10 people in Europe are going to get together and try to make a kingdom. Dr. Henry Morris has a great book, The Long War Against God, that deals with the history of evolutionary thought from Satan in the Garden of Eden all the way up, including the rise of various different Eastern religions, which really is the same thing. The idea that man gets to be God. It's all part of the same stuff. That's just an awesome book. We have a few left in hardback, which have the old cover. They're a lot more expensive, but the softback is $13 if you want to get it from our ministry. That's one of the top 5 or 6 books I've read in my life. It's excellent. Okay, so Satan decided, he wants to rule the world. Henry Morris traces this really well through history with different groups of folks that have taught the same basic idea: man gets to be God. So in this class, for the next several classes, we're going to be discussing just the last 200 years, since about the year 1800 until the present. How does evolution tie into the plans toward a new world order? We're going to look at the deadly effects that come about when people believe they are God, and they determine right from wrong. Nobody else tells me what to do. Well, first we're going to review a little bit of what we covered on Part 4, seminar tape number 4, which would have been Class CSE 102. Just hit a few highlights and then go right on and take it from there. James Hutton in the late 1700s wrote a book near the end of the century saying the earth is millions of years old. Now during this time, most folks thought the earth was 6,000 years old, is what the Bible taught. Okay, if you add up the dates in the Bible, you get about 6,000. James Hutton came along and said, I think the earth is much older than that. Now this was kind of a new idea and was rejected by most people. But a lot of Christians began to think, well, man, if the earth is millions of years old, then we need some way to make the Bible say that. So they started compromising the obvious teaching of the Bible and invented the gap theory, the day-age theory, progressive creation, all that kind of stuff. And there are still thousands of some really good Christians who have fallen for that right now. The Dake's Study Bible teaches it. Pastor John Hagee on TV teaches the gap theory. Benny Hinn teaches the gap theory. It's amazing how many folks teach this. Billy Graham believes in the gap theory. Now, one lady called me last week and said, or 2 weeks ago, and said, Billy Graham's brother, older brother, if you can imagine that, goes to my church. And I gave him your videotapes, and he loves them. And he's going to give them to Brother Billy and get him straightened out on the gap theory. I said, well, yeah, that'd be great, okay. During the late 1700s, most all nations were ruled by a king. This is called the age of monarchy. A monarch is a king. And the kings were ruling by what they said was divine right. God told me to be your king, and so you just do what I say. If you don't like it, that's tough. And a lot of abuses, of course, happen in a system like that. And you can study history from that perspective, and you'll see that people were getting sick of a king claiming he should be their boss just because God told him to, and his son ought to take over. You know, they inherit this right, succeed, you know, father to son to grandson. And so people began rebelling against this idea and started getting rid of the king. So for the next few hundred years, next 60 or 70 years maybe, there were quite a few revolutions around the world. The American Revolution threw off King George. The French Revolution, Polish Revolution, the Spanish Revolution, the German Revolution. They got rid of a king, basically. If you study the book of Revelation from this perspective, it appears that God gave the 7 churches the same sequence of events, that one of them was going to be the Laodiceans. Laodicea means the rule of the people. No longer is the king going to tell them what to do. The people themselves are going to vote on right and wrong. Basically a democracy idea, apparently prophesied in Revelation chapter 2 and 3 about the 7 churches. I don't know how far to carry that. Some, I think, get a little hyper on that topic. But I think it's an interesting study, okay, the 7 churches in Asia. Okay, so anyway, there's a time of anti-monarchy. And since the Bible says to honor the king, some people thought the Bible was an obstacle to their political objectives, and so they were looking for a way to discredit the Bible. So here we have, in the late 1700s, everybody's teaching the earth is a few thousand years old. James Hutton comes along and says, oh no, it's millions of years old. Now the Hindu religions were already teaching this. The Eastern religions were teaching the earth is infinitely old. It has, you know, it's always been. It's eternal. James Hutton's book, though, had a very strong influence on a lawyer named Sir Charles Lyell. Charles Lyell was a lawyer from Scotland. He hated the Bible. We covered some of that later in last, CSE 102. Charles Lyell developed the geologic column. Now, other people were involved in this. A guy named Steno and Smith and Cuvier and quite a few people. Actually, a lot of Christians were involved in developing this geologic column. A lot of creationists were involved. They were old earth creationists, the Hugh Ross kind of guys, even back then. And the scientists rejected this idea at first. And the church accepted it. Some churches, liberal churches, accepted it. We'll get into more of that later about a guy named Priestley. But he developed this geologic column. And the geologic column can only be found in one place in the world. Who remembers where that is? Textbooks. Can't find it anywhere else except the textbooks. F. Sherwood Taylor said, I myself have little doubt that in England it was the long-age uniformitarian geology and the theory of evolution that changed us from a Christian to a pagan nation. So England was a Christian country, sending out missionaries all over the world in the 1700s and early 1800s. I mean, they were the Christian nation on earth. They were sending out, missionaries everywhere. And now it's, very little Christianity in England, okay? A good rip-roaring church over there will have 50 people in it. Most of them run 15 or 20. I mean, the Bible-believing churches do. Very difficult. Same thing in most of the European-type countries. But Charles Lyell wrote his book in 1830. Charles Darwin graduated from Bible college in 1831. He set sail on board the Beagle to go around and collect bugs and birds. And Darwin actually argued with some of the sailors in favor of creation and argued against the teaching of the day, which was kind of a pre-evolutionary type teaching. He tried to convert some of the sailors. The captain on board the ship was a guy named Captain Fitzroy. Fitzroy was one of those kind of guys that you do it my way or that, my way or the highway, very intolerant of anybody who disagreed on anything. But he and Darwin had very interesting discussions on this topic. Darwin, though, at the same time he's gone this 5-year-long voyage, he's reading these books by Charles Lyell. Now, somebody told me as a brand new Christian, gave me advice that somebody else had given years ago. He said, in 10 years, you're going to be the same person you are right now, except for the people you meet and the books you read. Read good books. It'll change you into what you want to be. Read bad books, it'll make you a bad person. You read good books, it'll totally change. The more you read of good stuff, the better off you are. So, Lyell read this book. He said that book changed his life forever. Lyell also read a book by a guy named Thomas Malthus. So I want you to know for the quiz 2 people that strongly influenced Charles Darwin. One was Charles Lyell, and the other was a guy named Thomas Malthus. Malthus had written a book in 1790, I think, I don't know, sometime back then. Malthus said, the population grows geometrically. You multiply, 2 times 2 is 4, times 2 is 8, times 2 is 16, population takes off geometrically. the food supply can only grow arithmetically. 2 plus 2 plus 2 plus 2. See, 2 plus 2 plus 2 plus 2, 4 times, you end up with 2, 4, 6, 8. 2 times 2 times 2 times 2, you end up with 16, or 64. So, now Malthus was wrong, okay? As the population grows, there are more people available to plow the land. But he's looking at it totally wrong. Malthus affected a lot of people back in those days. Basically, the idea was, look, there's going to be more people born than can possibly survive because the food supply is limited. That was his faulty thinking, but whether he's right or wrong at this point doesn't matter. The fact is, he did influence Charles Darwin. So Darwin thought, well, let's see, if more people are born than can possibly survive, then the weakest are going to die off. Nature is going to select the strongest to survive and the weakest to die off. Anybody seen the movie The Christmas Carol? Charles Dickens, every Christmas they play that thing. This was supposedly taking place, set in the early or mid-1800s, when evolution was a popular theory, and the teachings of Thomas Malthus was still very influential. Remember when the Scrooge was asked the question, what about this person that's going to die, you know? And he said, well, let them die and decrease the surplus population. Remember that phrase in there? And later on, the Ghost of Christmas Present, or one of those, you know, said, he repeated that back to him. Let them die and decrease the surplus population. Well, that is exactly what the thinking of the day was. Are there no workhouses? That's what that was. It's so classically true of that time period because of Malthus's teaching that you know everybody can't live. So since everybody can't live, it's best if the weak ones die. Otherwise, the whole population becomes weak. We really ought to have the weak ones die and the strong ones survive. Then the farmer, you know, save the best ones for breeding and, you know, sell off the worst ones. Sure, you want to develop your stock of whether it's tomatoes or apples or anything. You know, you try to save the best. So in 1790, James Hutton's book began people on the trip of doubting that the earth is 6,000 years old, which of course made them doubt the Bible. A few years later, Charles Lyell comes along and makes people take away the flood. Then along came Charlie Darwin, and he took away the Creator. Now what we're going to study here is what happened since 1850, when it took about 10 years for evolution thinking to kind of, you know, permeate society. But boy, what happened after that? With the rise of communism, socialism, Marxism, it all ties together. And I don't think you can possibly understand the history of the last 150 years and how it's going to affect you today until you see how evolution ties into this. Some people thought, you know, if there is no God and man evolved, then one color of man must be superior to the rest, which is how racism comes in. Now, there's always been racism, okay? People have subjugated other folks because of their skin color. But when you think you're God, then you get to make these kind of decisions. The Bible says clearly we're all descended from one family. There's no reason to be a racist. But evolution would teach one race must be superior. Just like this Harold Rafton said, do humanists believe in a supreme being? Emphatically, yes. That supreme being is man. Humanists have no knowledge of any being more supreme. American humanist, this guy said, the turning point in history will be the moment that man becomes aware that the only God of man is man himself. Yep, we're in trouble. I had a student tell me in a public school in Pennsylvania, he said he was an atheist. And I said, well, then how do you tell right from wrong? He said, well, I decide if something's right or wrong. He said, I'm the God of my own universe. What a philosophy. I said, well, son, I'm glad to hear that because I'm going to shoot you in 5 minutes. He said, you can't do that. I said, oh, yeah, you can. You see, I'm the God of my own universe. And I decided it's fine for me to shoot you. What's wrong with that thinking? If evolution is true, what's wrong with that thinking? Nothing. That's the way it goes, right? Survival of the fittest, exactly right. So we're going to study now a little bit about racism and how it ties in with evolution. When we're done with this, we'll go into communism and how it ties in with evolution. Then we'll go into Nazism and how it ties in, and then into the New World Order and how it ties in. It'll probably take us about the next 55 weeks, but we'll work on it here. Here's Charles Darwin's book. Notice the title, The Origin of Species. Now, that is not the entire title to the book. We'll get into the whole title in just a minute, okay? But almost all the books, if kids today hear about Charles Darwin's book, They're only told, the title was The Origin of Species. One thing you need to know for the quiz is the real title to the book, coming up next. Now, the evolution theory came out way before Charles Darwin in 1859. Okay? Charles Darwin's grandfather, Erasmus Darwin, taught the same thing. Erasmus Darwin was a medical doctor. He was so huge they cut out the table to allow a place for his belly while he ate. He had a special table, custom made, cut out, just so he could sit there and eat. But he really he rejected God, rejected all sorts of things, and he pretty much wrote most of what Darwin wrote. And many people think that Darwin simply plagiarized or stole the work from his grandfather and claimed it as his own. Never gave Grandpa any credit whatsoever. But Charles Darwin, he came along at an opportune time for this theory to really be acceptable, whereas 60 years earlier, when Grandpa came up with it, people weren't ready to accept it. There were too many strong Christians still, you know, around 1800. So he called it The Origin of Species. Now, you got to be careful when you get into a discussion on creation evolution. The question is not, what is the origin of species? The question is, what is the origin of kinds? The Bible says they bring forth after their kind. It doesn't say they bring forth after their species. For instance, these are all different species of monkeys. But if you stand back and look at it, you should notice one thing. They're all monkeys. It's the same kind of animal, right? I mean, obviously it's not a tomato or a banana or a horse. It's the same kind of animal. Another thing you got to question is, who is deciding what a species is? Who's making this decision anyway? And the evolutionists get all bent out of shape with me because they'll say, we have proven species can be created. I don't question that. Yeah, but have you made a new kind of animal? Like the guy in Indiana. He said, I've got proof for evolution. I said, oh really, what is it? He said, I'm working in the laboratory right now on soybean plants, and we have created soybean plants that are resistant to frost. Totally new species. I said, oh, that'll be handy. I mean, that's good. But what'd you start with? He said, a soybean plant. I said, oh, what do you have now? Soybean plant. I said, I'm sorry, sir. That's not a new kind, okay? So you might have decided it's a new species, and I'm proud of you, but that's not a new kind, okay? It's still a plant. Watch what this textbook does. This is Heath Biology, 91 edition. Darwin published his findings in a book titled On the Origin of Species by Means of Natural Selection. They still don't give the whole title. Now, back in the 1800s, it was very common for the title of your book to be real long. Today we try to make them, you know, short. But they had real long titles back in those days. Here is the title from the title page of Charles Darwin's book. The Origin of Species by Means of Natural Selection, or the Preservation of Favored Races in the Struggle for Life. Who can tell me? You need to know the year this book was published, 1859, for a quiz. When did the American Civil War start? 1861. So what's going on in America in 1859? Slavery, right? So when this book comes out, those people who are for slavery, of course, are thinking, wow, here's a perfect way to justify what we're doing anyway. Darwin is proving scientifically that one race is superior to another. And of course, since I'm white, I know it's the white people. The black people, of course, thought the blacks were superior. The Chinese thought the Chinese were superior. But this book really, now this didn't create racism, okay? But this book coming out in the mid-1800s is like throwing gasoline on a fire. Racism was now justified. Favored races. By the way, back in the Old English spelling, oftentimes they put a U in. Same with the color. The word color, C-O-L-O-U-R, is proper spelling, as is C-O-L-O-R. The U is sometimes in there for, so favored races. This is not a misspelling. That's what they called it back then. You might want to read some of these books. Seven Men Who Rule the World from the Grave, or Fourth Reich of the Rich, great book by Des Griffin, who lives in Oregon. Has written extensively about people who want to, you know, control the world, and how that philosophies have had such a powerful impact. Charles Darwin's book was Origin of Species by Means of Natural Selection or the Preservation of Favored Races. Now, even scientists today, like 1998 Encyclopedia, will say Origin of Species was not addressed in 1859. and is still a mystery in 1998. Both the origin of life and the origin of major groups of animals remains unknown. That's quite a confession. Darwin's book was The Origin of Species, but he never did discuss the origin of species. I don't know why you called it the book that, you know. It's one of the most boring books you ever read. I've got it if you want to try to read the thing. Absolutely boring. This guy's a lousy author, a lousy scientist, lousy thinker, in my humble opinion. Okay. But the idea that there's a favored race, to me, would translate to the fact that we get to become God. You mean I'm the favored race? You mean I'm better than everybody else? Oh. Can you see how this would tie into the same equation? You get to be God. Favored race. Charles Darwin, in his book, showed his philosophy. He said, thus, from the war of nature, from famine and death, the most exalted object we are capable of conceiving, namely the production of higher animals, directly follows. Now tell me, first of all, who's a higher animal?
Humans.
Yeah, I mean, this idea of classifying things in an order of this one's the highest animal and this is the lower form of life. For instance, some people will say single-celled creatures like amoeba or paramecium are primitive life forms. There's no such thing as a primitive life form, okay? Actually, they're more complicated because for my body to do what it does, I have all these different systems. 50 trillion cells so that I can eat and digest food, breathe, move around, you know, keep the body warm, etc. Other animals do that in one cell. Yeah, that's pretty complicated. So the whole idea that there are primitive life forms and advanced life forms, that whole concept is silly. If it's alive, it's complicated. Incredibly complicated. But Darwin's philosophy was that the way you get these higher animals is through suffering, war, misfits, death, cruelty. This goes back to, you know, reflecting what Malthus taught. Only the strongest really should survive. That's what's best for the species, okay, if the strongest survive. Darwin thought that natives were just advanced animals. Now back in 1859, we had slavery in our country. Racism was popular. It was accepted. It was still wrong, but it was happening. You bought and sold Negroes like slaves. Henry Fairfield Osborn is a name you ought to learn. He was the director, curator of the American Museum of Natural History. He was one of the guys that was going to come in and testify during the Scopes trial and give evidence for evolution. He said, the standard of intelligence of the average adult Negro is similar to that of the 11-year-old youth of the species Homo sapien. Now, if a teacher said that in class today at the University of West Florida, what would happen? He'd certainly be fired and probably shot, right? Oh, Jesse would go get him, wouldn't he? Oh, Jesse Jackson. The guy's a racist. And yet he was one of the strong promoters of evolution back in the 1920s. Most of the museums exist to promote evolution. Many museums were founded by people who believed in evolution and who left behind large chunks of money saying, I want you to start a museum to spread this religion. That's basically what it amounts to. Okay? Thomas Huxley, he's the guy that made Darwin popular. Darwin wrote his book, published it, and went and hid. Huxley went around publicly preaching evolution. Huxley said, no rational man, cognizant of the facts, believes that the average Negro is the equal, still less the superior, of the white man. Now keep in mind, he's saying this back in 1871. Civil War is over, slaves are freed. Did that stop racism? 1960s, we still had trouble in this country. Black people sat on the back of the bus, right? Separate bathrooms, separate schools, you know, segregation. This Priestley said, the black people of Australia, talking about the Aborigines, exactly the same race as the African Negro, cannot take in the gospel. All attempts to bring them to a knowledge of the true God have as yet failed utterly. Poor brutes in human shape, they must perish off the face of the earth like brute beasts. You ever see the movie Quigley Down Under? Mm-hmm. He hired this Quigley guy to come in and shoot Australian Aborigines. because he thought they were inferior. They're just an animal. I was out soul winning one night in Longview, Texas. I had a bus route in an all-black neighborhood. For 17 years, I drove a church bus and picked up black kids and brought them to church. Had a wonderful time. Loved it, okay? Many times I'd be out there at midnight, the only white guy in the whole complex, you know. A little nervous once in a while, but hey, I had a wonderful time. Loved it. I've brought thousands and thousands of black people to church and to the Lord, okay, got them saved. But I'm out there, I couldn't sleep one night, so I got up 2 in the morning, drove down to my bus route to go visiting, because there's always folks up at 2 in the morning in the black neighborhoods, you know. And this one guy was drunk. He was turning his car, thinking he's going down the road, but he drove down the railroad tracks instead. Turned too soon. He drove about 20 feet, and the rails bottomed out, you know, stopped his car, so he's stuck. And the drunk guy's out there trying to figure out, well, how come my car won't move, you know? So I thought, man, a train's going to come and plaster this guy all over the county. So I got out of my car, not on the tracks, and I walked down to help this guy. A couple of other folks stopped, and we went down there and tried to push the guy's car backwards. And I got talking to one of the men who stopped to help, and he said, what are you doing out here? This is a dangerous neighborhood. I said, no, this is my bus route. I come here all the time. I know most of these folks. He said, your bus route? I said, yeah, I drive a bus in here. I bring these folks to church and, you know, tell them about the Lord. He said, these folks are all black. I said, well, not the palms of their hands. He said, black folks don't have souls.
And that was when?
This was Texas. My kids were little, so 20 years ago. I said, black people don't have souls. I said, are you part of the KKK? He said, yeah, how'd you know? Just a lucky guess, you know. The idea that black people don't have souls is still being taught today, folks. Okay? Racism's not over. Now, Charles Kingsley was an Anglican priest who promoted Darwin. If it hadn't been for Kingsley talking other Anglican priests and church people into believing in evolution, it probably would have been a dud as a theory. Priestley's the primary guy who got the church people to believing in evolution. So put his name down as a quiz question. Who's the Anglican priest that promoted evolution? The scientists rejected Darwin's idea. You think a people can come from a rock? Yeah, right. Nobody believed that. Priestley got all the church people believing in it, and pretty soon this evolution theory spread around, and Charles Kingsley, I keep saying Priestley, Kingsley was the Anglican priest who promoted this crazy idea. Back in this time, Africans were bought and sold like slaves. They packed them into ships. Here's an example of how they would loose pack them. The ship was allowed to carry 454 slaves. They had 451 on this voyage. On one voyage, she carried 609. Many times, slaves died on the trip. They just chained them to the deck. You didn't get up. You stayed right there for 2 weeks. Got to go to the bathroom? Go ahead. You're staying right here for 2 weeks. Many died. When slavery became illegal, or things, sometimes slaving ships would chain them all together, and if they thought they might get caught, bring them up on board, push them overboard, drown them all, just so you don't get caught carrying a cargo of slaves. Here's an example of how they would loose pack them so more would survive. They honestly considered them like cows or sheep. It's just an animal. They thought they didn't have souls. I don't think you'll understand the slavery of the 1800s until you understand how evolution ties in. One more thought and we'll quit. This is from Creation Ex Nihilo magazine. A New South Wales missionary was the horrified witness to the slaughter by mounted police of a group of dozens of Aboriginal men, women, and children. 45 heads were then boiled down, and the 10 best skulls were packed off for overseas. They rounded up the Aborigines, shot them, cut their heads off, boiled them to get rid of all the flesh, and sold the skulls to museums for displays on evolution. The Smithsonian right now, I have heard from very reliable sources, has 33,000 sets of human remains in their basement. Many of the displays that colleges will use as evidence for evolution, the shapes of the skulls being slightly different, you know, are from people that died in the last 200 years. Tasmania, south of Australia, I sat by a guy in the airplane a couple weeks ago from Tasmania. The Tasmanian Aborigines were all slaughtered. There isn't one that survived. The last one was killed in 1908. And they took part of his body and made a tobacco pouch out of it for somebody to carry tobacco. It's unreal what happened. That stuff wouldn't have happened had it not been for the evolution theory. The Bible says all nations are of one blood. And there's no reason to be a racist at all. They thought the Aborigines had not evolved as far, therefore they're just an animal. It's okay to kill them. One of the evidences they used for this was the Aborigines have bigger jawbones. And they said, wow, see, that proves they used to be a monkey. They're closer to a monkey than we are. We'll get into that next class, okay? How racism ties in. Then we're going to get into communism. And that's going to be very politically incorrect. You may not want to be here for those next few classes, but see you next week. Thank you.